Can you feel the weight of silence settling around you, modern clamor dissolving into the deeper history beneath too? You hear the subtle grinding of mortar against pestle in a time long past? Does the dry heat of an ancient evening already cling? To your skin, imagine the cool, smooth feel of carved marble beneath your fingertips now. The breath slow to the rhythm of the turning earth itself welcome. Sleeper, I'm Nasrullah, and tonight we wander the hushed streets of a sleeping city. We seek the comforting routine of those whose lives were etched upon the bedrock of time. Athens waits, not the Athens of legend or grand pronouncements, but the quiet, humble Athens of the day-to-day, the simple truth of survival and shade the sun has fully dipped. Beyond the Saronic Gulf, leaving behind a residue of amber light clinging to the slopes of the Acropolis. Stone face, now a deep mauve under the cooling sky. Relentless dry dust of the day is beginning to settle each speck, falling back to the earth. Exhausted by the heat, a blanket of velvet shadow spreads across the ceramic roof tiles of the Kerameikos district. The sounds of the Agora, the marketplace, are retracting. The shrill calls of the fishmongers have been softened to memory. Arguments of the philosophers have drifted into the darkening porticos. Only the persistent cicada song remains a steady drone against the deepening quiet. This is the hour of deep transition in classical Attica. The Athenian day begins and ends with the diligent management of light and shadow and the deep, slow commitment to basic needs. We drift now above the narrow, winding lanes. The streets are unpaved, uneven paths between high walls built primarily of sun-baked mud brick upon foundational stones look down into an ordinary Athenian home. The oikos is built around an open courtyard. The atrium, the central focus of the small universe for this family unit. The courtyard remains warm, retaining the memory of the fierce midday sun, but the air moving through the cistern vents promises a slow evening coolness. The heavy door to the outside, the main entrance, is often thick timber bolted. Now, against the stray dog or the lingering late-hour traveler seeking lodging inside, the women gather. In the Gynaeconides, the women's quarters, they work by the concentrated light of a small clay olive oil lamp. The air is thick with the scent of burning oil and the dry wool of the finished cloth. A single loom stands tall and heavy in the room, dominating. The space is warped threads stretching taut, awaiting the morning light and fresh momentum. But now the final threads are tied off with careful hands. The work of the day concluded with a soft sigh of exhaustion and relief. The scent of barley porridge is heavy in the cooling kitchen air. A slow, humble meal of maza, a simple barley cake, perhaps dipped in oil and honey. No, 3 elaborate feasts here tonight, or any night in this modest home. Only sustenance to carry them through the long hours of darkness. Heads of the household, the men have finished their low discussions. They talk of grain prices at the Piraeus port, perhaps, or the latest dry news whispered from the assembly on the Nix Hill. Their voices are low murmurs. Now the argument's spent and forgotten until sunrise. The bed is profoundly simple, a low wooden frame strung with taut leather straps. Heavy woolen blanket serves as the cover even in this lingering warmth for. The nights can sometimes betray the promises of the day, the Athenian. Sleeper seeks the deep comfort of the stable earth beneath them, letting go of the relentless routine of the light hours. The sound of the water being poured into the shallow bronze basin is clear and resonant, a final washing of the feet and face. Before the deep oblivion of sleep claims them, we watch the slow, simple routine unfold across the shadowed courtyard. The steady turning of their ancient world continues without haste, and we let our own modern cares dissipate into the shadows of their only rest here, now in the hushed heart of the classical city. As the starlight begins to pierce the black velvet sky above the silent hills, allow ourselves to sink deeper, deeper still into the quiet rhythm of this ancient Athenian night, the city. Breathe slowly now, the deep, slow breath of stone and tired muscle. The narrow streets hold the heat like a warm amphora, but a subtle, gentle breeze has begun to move down from Mount Hymettus, carrying the dry, clean scent of wild thyme and distant pines. It whispers past the high walls and through the small open window grates, bringing the promise of dew before dawn. Sleep here is heavy and uncomplicated. There are no glowing screens or ringing devices to disturb the primal quiet, only the distant mournful hoot of an owl hunting over the fields of Attica, the oikos is organized for sleep. Men sleep on simple pallets in the andron, the men's formal reception room during the day. Women remain clustered in their own space, a practical necessity for privacy and protection in a world of little light. The children settle quickly, their small bodies heavy with play and dust. They dream of chasing goats or perhaps watching the potters throw clay shapes near the gate. Their dreams are as simple as their DIETAs clears the water drawn from the deep covered. Will we observe the flame of the oil lamp, now reduced to a minute flickering point, casts long distorted shapes onto the mud-plastered wall shapes that dance like ghosts of forgotten philosophers, arguing in the shadows, but soon even this tiny flame will be carefully extinguished, leaving the room cloaked in absolute darkness. Necessary step to conserve the precious olive oil supply, and to usher in the complete retreat of the mind. The night in Athens belonged entirely to the moon and the stars, time when human endeavors paused, when the loud clamor of democracy was shelved until the trumpet blast of morning. Think of the materials surrounding you in this deep stillness, the coarse texture of the linen tunic against the skin, the roughness of the simple woven rug under the bare foot, the immense unyielding density of the bedrock foundation beneath the clay floor. Everything speaks of permanence and simplicity. Labor that was both honest and repetitive. There's great comfort in this repetition, this predictable cycle. Barley ground, the water drawn, the cloth woven, the discussions held, and the inevitable deep sleep that washes over the city are settling into the rhythm of the Athenian sleeper. Their daily worries about taxation or military service fade into the humid darkness. They seek not adventure, but stability, not revolution, but the certainty of the next day's fun. Feel your own modern thoughts slowing like the drying. Play on the wheel, hear the slow, careful drip of water from a small leak in the terracotta roof drainage. Steady, slow rhythm counting the passage of the unseen hours. Oikos is now silent. The entire city is now committed to the deepest phase of slumber. We are suspended here between the long heat of yesterday, the approaching pale light of tomorrow. Let the ancient quiet wrap itself around you, now a thick, soothing blanket of Athenian night breathe. In the scent of thyme and dust and wood smoke, lingering on the air, breathe out all resistance, all taut tension. Drift deeper still into this uncomplicated, simple existence. This boring, comforting, ancient world will remain here together in the quiet, cool shadow, waiting the subtle shift of the starlight as the hours of deep, ancient sleep flow slowly onward. Let the heavy quiet settle like the finest dust of marble sifting down from the high slopes of Mount Hymettus, invisible powder coating the deep velvet of the night you. Feel the weight of what is still, the profound stillness of ancient stone, a massive presence pressing gently against the edges of your awareness. This is the timeless moment just before the sun remembers its duty, before the first sliver of heat bleeds across the Aegean horizon. Allow the air to thicken around you. Is cool, air dry, air carrying the scent of wild thyme and faint smoke. Perfume of sleeping fire and earth, the scent of deep slumber in the Attic soil. Let the muscles soften. Let the mind unspool its necessary threads of worry. They are unimportant now. Are held suspended in the amber of a long ago morning. The world outside is cloaked in the final moments of true darkness. Darkness that feels heavier, richer than any modern night because it is untouched by electric glare. Listen deeply for the quiet hum beneath the silence, the sound of massive time slowly turning to the memory of Athenian life, a life defined by the slow rhythm of the sun and the grinding necessity of the earth. The wooden beams above are sighing softly, old cypress wood dried and seasoned by centuries of summer heat. They carry the collective memory of every breath taken beneath them, every quiet dream dreamt within this low-roofed space. Sink further into this profound hush. Know that you are safe here, cloaked in the comfort of history's deep embrace. Warmth derived not from fire, but from the sheer weight of what was I am. Nasrullah, and we journey now not to the famed battles, nor the soaring oratory of the assembly, but to the heart of the ordinary day, the quiet, slow unfolding of life in a 5th century Athenian house. We seek the slow, boring history. The routines that built an empire, but demanded no fanfare. We seek the texture of existence in the unremembered lanes of the next slope where the morning ritual is about to begin its measured progress feel. The rough weave of the simple sleeping pallet beneath you, perhaps a sack stuffed with wool or straw, maybe a simple piece of thick felt resting. Upon a wooden base it is neither soft nor hard. It is simply honest. It provides the necessary separation from the packed dirt floor below. The air is slightly damp close to the ground, a cool breath drawn up from the deep foundations of the ancient stone walls. The earliest gray light begins to trace the rough edges of the doorway. It is not yet strong enough to cast shadows, only to thin the opacity of the velvet darkness. The room is small, the andron perhaps, or the shared sleeping space of the family. The furnishings are sparse and functional. A low chest perhaps for storing linen tunics, a few earthen vessels standing sentinel in a corner, each vessel holding the quiet weight of its purpose, one for water, one for olive oil, one for grain. The sounds begin far away, very faint at first, almost geological. The low, rhythmic turning of a millstone somewhere down the hill, a steady, slow scrape against stone. The sound of tomorrow. Being ground from yesterday's barley, the sound of the foundational labor of this civilization is a persistent drone, a mechanical prayer to sustenance. It settles into the background noise of the dawning city. And then closer, sharper, clearer. The crow of the first proud rooster, a strident declaration of daylight that cuts through the lingering quiet, is not a poetic sound. It is simply a loud, insistent sound. The signal for the first stirrings within the household, a quiet movement from the mistress of the house, the Kyria, perhaps before the men, before the slaves, to manage the logistics of the morning fires. You hear the faint dragging sound of a coarse wool blanket being pulled back, a small intake of breath in the adjacent room. The first acknowledgement that the night has truly ended. The air within the house is stale heavy with the faint scent of spent oil lamps and the close presence of sleeping bodies. It is a smell of human reality, of simple, unventilated rooms where privacy is a rare luxury. A low murmur begins, the quiet voices of a slave or a younger son perhaps responding. To the quiet call of the Kyria, the need for fire is immediate, for heat is necessary for the preparation of the morning meal, a simple meal of kaikiana. Humble mixture of barley groats, water, and sometimes pungent cheese, or perhaps just bread dipped in watered wine. The fire must be coaxed back to life, a difficult, slow task in the days before readily available matches, if the embers were carefully preserved. Beneath ash from the previous night, the work is quicker, a careful blowing, a slow, gentle feeding of tinder and dry olive wood splinters. If the embers failed, then the friction of a fire drill must begin, a slow, laborious grinding that speaks of human patience and physical effort. Listen now for that light scratching sound, the rubbing of wood upon wood, seeking the necessary heat, a sound that grounds you utterly in this ancient moment. The grinding ceases, a soft puff of smoke immediately followed by the crackle of tiny flames catching hold. The first fire of the day is born, a tiny sun within the hearth pit, and the light it casts is immediately different from the gray light of the dawn. It is warm, it is amber, it is glancing, it paints the rough mud brick walls with shifting shadows, making the room seem deeper, more mysterious now. The daily task of fetching water must begin. Necessary journey to the public fountain, the Creen, where the cold stream flows from a distant mountain spring. The house slave or the young woman of the household takes up the massive clay pitcher. The hydra, three-handled vessel, heavy even when empty. You hear the faint, slow shuffle of sandals upon the earth floor as the door is opened to the outer courtyard. The all-heavy gray light rushes in, momentarily illuminating the dark space. The door closes with a gentle thud, leaving the room once more cloaked in the golden light of the hearth. A period of waiting begins. The necessary time for the water to be fetched, the groats to soften the bread to be broken. This waiting time is precious. It is when the Athenian man first prepares himself for the day's activities. He rises slowly from the pallet, the rough weave of the hamadia on the outer cloak or the chiton. The simple tunic is folded or hung neatly on a wooden peg. There is no rush. The Athenian pace of life, particularly the morning pace, is deliberate and slow, a mindful process of preparation. The First act is the cleansing, not a lavish bath that luxury awaits the afternoon or the public bathhouses, but a simple splash of cold water upon the face and arms. Water brought in a small bronze bowl. The chill of the early morning spring water is immediate a sharp shock that clears the lingering mists. Of sleep, the sensation is bracing and clean. The cold water drips onto the earth, floor vanishing quickly into the dry dust. Then comes the application of oil, a small amount of precious olive oil poured into the palm of the hand and rubbed into the skin. It is a slow rhythmic application of moisture and scent. The oil is simple, perhaps scented with iris or rose for those who can afford it, but more likely just the pure clean smell of the olive fruit itself. The oil seals the skin against the drying sun. And the pervasive dust of the city streets, it is a necessary armor. The clothing is put on next. The simple chiton, a rectangle of linen or soft wool, draped and fastened at the shoulders, falls in natural pleasing folds to the knees. This garment is the uniform of Athenian life. It requires no belts, no complex fastenings, just the simple drape of the cloth, a quiet beauty in its utter simplicity. Weight of the linen is light, comforting, yet moves with the body without restriction. The man is ready to face the world, but the day itself has not yet fully arrived. He moves quietly now to the prostas, the small hallway or vestibule, listening for the sounds of the courtyard. The water has returned. The heavy hydria now stands full and grounded by its vital load. The sounds of the morning meal preparation are becoming clear, the gentle hiss of water being heated over the embers, the soft scraping of a wooden spoon against a pottery bowl. The smells are shifting now. The raw, earthy smell of the fire gives way to the subtle aroma of warm barley, a simple, nutritious smell, the smell of foundational strength. He waits for the meal. This quiet waiting is a cornerstone of the Athenian morning, a time of contemplation before the demands of civic life begin. The house is constructed primarily of mud brick and limestone rubble. The interior walls are often plastered with a simple lime wash, sometimes painted with geometric borders, but often just stark white or beige. Look at the wall now. It is uneven, imperfect. Etched with the slight imperfections of human hands, it reflects the amber light of the hearth in a warm, soft diffusion. The shadows cast by the moving bodies are large and fluid, distorting the figures into quiet giants on the low ceiling. The slave, perhaps an older man or a young boy, brings the small table. The trapeza, a low three-legged structure placed close to the master. Bio is placed upon a thick musa, a cake made from barley, kneaded into a firm disc ready to be broken in dip can. The watered wine necessary not for intoxication, but for safety and flavor. Water supply in the city, even when fresh from the spring, was often treated with skepticism. The wine served as a purifier and a slight fortifier. He eats slowly, deliberately. The texture of the barley cake is coarse, satisfying. It requires mindful chewing. There's no conversation yet. The focused, quiet sounds of the household beginning its daily mechanism. Rising sun outside is beginning to assert its true power. The light piercing the small window openings is now golden, not great. Falls onto the earth floor, revealing the tracked dust and the fragments of straw. Every floor is an archive of the movement that crosses it. The meal is finished. The table is quietly removed. The man now takes his cloak, the himation. This is the final layer. The signature garment of the free citizen is a heavy rectangle of wool, often dyed a deep cream or ochre. It is not worn the way modern coat is worn. It is draped a complex arrangement requiring skillful wrapping and careful balance. It is looped over one shoulder, leaving the dominant arm free. It is a flowing, eloquent piece of cloth. Its precise folds communicate status and civic identity. The drape must be right-ate perfect. Cascade of wool that moves with dignity. He settles the folds, the weight of the wool substantial upon his shoulders. He is ready now to step out of the secure boundaries of the oikos, the house, and into the emerging reality of the Athenian street. Street outside is not paved. It is a narrow channel of packed dirt and stones winding between the high windowless walls of the surrounding homes. It's still relatively quiet, only the sounds of other households beginning their routines. A distant donkey, braying in protest at an early load, the ringing clang of a blacksmith hammer somewhere near the ceramic quarter. These sounds are far off, melodic in their distance. He opens the outer door. The Pyros, the lintel of the door is low, forcing a slight. Ducking motion A, respectful submission to the boundary of the home. He steps out into the cool morning light. The air is immediately fresher, cleaner than the close air of the house. Carries the strong aroma of dust and sun-warmed earth. He glances. Up toward the Acropolis, visible from many points in the city, a massive rock crowned by the unfinished work of the great temples. Marble gleams faintly pink and gold in the morning light. Is always there, a silent, immutable presence overseeing. The daily chaos of the city, below the weight of history, is etched into that rock, but the Athenian does not stare it. It's simply the landscape, the ultimate reference point. He begins his slow walk toward the Agora, the marketplace, the civic center, the heart of the city's discourse. He does not rush. The pace of the walk is measured, deliberate. Sandals upon the dusty street make a light scuffing sound, a dry sound familiar to every resident of this city. The street is still sparsely populated. Water carrier moving with rapid steps, balancing the weight of the water. The OK baker's apprentice hurrying with the first loaves of the day, their arms dusted white with flour. Shutters of the small workshops are beginning to be pulled back, a grating sound of wood against stone revealing. The dark interiors where the artisans are preparing their tools. The smell of raw leather mingles with the smell of freshly cut wood. The neighborhood is waking up slowly, coherently. Each sound, each action is a small building block of the vast city mechanism. He passes the simple shrines placed at the corners of the lanes, small. Markers dedicated to Hermes, the god of boundaries and travelers. A quick glance, perhaps a whispered acknowledgement, a tiny ritual of deference to the gods who govern the mundane movements of life. The houses along the street are uniform in their rough, anonymity mud brick walls, covered sometimes in plaster, sometimes left plain. No windows face the street except small high vents to preserve privacy. The street is simply a passage, a canyon between domestic fortifications. The sun is climbing steadily. It begins to create sharp, defined shadows. The light is becoming intensely bright, reflecting off the white dust. The warmth is already increasing, promising the furnace heat of midday, but for now, the air remains crisp, pleasant. He reaches the edge of the residential district. Noise level begins to rise, a gentle roar that suggests the convergence of many lives. The closer he gets to the Agora, the more distinct the sounds become. The lowing of oxen pulling carts, higher pitched bleating of sheep being driven to market, the specific clamor of human voices raised in or argument. This is the sound of the democratic city waking up to its duties. He rounds a final corner and the expanse of the Agora opens up before him. It is not yet densely crowded. The merchants are still setting up their stalls, arranging their wares beneath temporary shelters. Of linen or canvas, the area is dominated by the long stones-covered walkways lined with massive columns, providing shade and shelter. The light here is filtered, diffused, a lovely soft light that invites discussion and contemplation. The air smells different. Here a complicated mixture of spices, leather, oil, foodstuffs, and unwashed humanity. It is the smell of commerce and civic gathering. He steps onto the sacred ground of the Agora, his steps now slower, more deliberate. He is crossing a threshold, leaving the private realm of the home for the public realm of the citizen. He is looking for a group of familiar faces, perhaps the philosophers gathering at the steps of the royal store. Maybe the quiet group of friends who discuss the price of grain near the boundary stones. The day stretches ahead, a vast expanse of time defined by conversation, debate, and the slow movement of people. The weight of civic life begins to settle upon him, necessary burden of responsibility and discourse. He finds a spot of shade beneath the deep shadow of a marble column. The stone is cool, smooth beneath his hand, a palpable sense of permanence in the fleeting moment. He stands there simply watching, observing the measured movement of Athenian life. The first words of the day are about to be spoken, a philosophical inquiry or the mundane negotiation. The noise levels continue to rise, a slow, steady swell of human energy. The sun climbs higher. The weight of the woolen hemation begins to feel heavy, a comfort and a commitment. We leave him standing there in the cool shade, poised on the edge of the great civic dialogue. But an ordinary Athenian day unfolds slowly, deliberately. Long, slow narrative of dust debate and simple barley bread. Let the scene hold you in. Its quiet focus allow the sound of the emerging Agora to wash over you. Measured sound of the ancient world at work drifting down into the profound silence that awaits you. Silence within the stone, the silence of deep, deep rest let. The memory of the light and the dust dissolve, now leaving only the sense of weight and calm. The weight of the unhurried moment, the deep, heavy calm of ancient. Athens sleeping, now to drifting down, sinking deep. The shadows lengthen now. They stretch and dissolve like smoke poured onto still water. You are drifting gently down. Past the clamor of the day, past the ringing bells of the world, the air around you cools to a perfect hushed temperature. A quietude envelops you heavy and soft. Like velvet midnight, let the weight of your eyelids settle upon you like ancient stone, smoothing the troubled edges of the mind you. Sink willingly into the boundless obsidian dark. Nothing remains but the slow, easy rhythm of your own breath and the steady, murmuring voice that guides your path inward. We are here in the silence. I am Nasrullah, your guide through the vaulted passages of the forgotten world. I ask only that you release the grip of wakefulness and allow the history to breathe through. You night, we begin a long descent journey, not through distance, but through time itself. We seek the hidden places, the quiet corners where knowledge sleeps untouched by the sun tonight. We enter the scriptorium of the whispered name it is rumored. To lie far beneath the Libyan sands, protected by layers of silence and memory, we stand now at the threshold of the known world below. U.S. spirals, a stairwell carved from basalt slick with the damp millennia. The air thickens with the scent of dried cedar and the fine granular dust of ages. It is an overwhelming sense of profound age that greets USA silence, so dense it seems to press against the eardrums, demanding reverence. Take a step down now, feeling the coolness of the stone against the solace of your feet. One step and then another, descending slowly into the earth's deep core. Light above is dwindling, fading into a thin, distant haze. Soon only the small, flickering amber lamp I carry will pierce the gloom this flickering gold is. Our only mooring, our only visible link through reality we chase. The spiral continues, winding down and down past unseen vaults and sealed chambers. Each revolution of the stair is a turning page in the ledger of time. We leave behind the noise of the kings and the cries of the market and the hurried footsteps of the modern hour. We seek only the slow whisper of the ink on the parchment. The scriptorium is not a place built for man, but built for preservation. The walls here are massive cyclopean, blocks stacked without mortar, only by the sheer colossal weight of their being. They stand against the earthquake and the flood and the countless centuries of slow decay. Look closely at the surface of this stone. Is etched not by human hand, but by the slow crystalline growth of salt and time. It glistens, faintly catching the weak amber light. In tiny microscopic points, we've reached the bottom now. The stair opens onto a vast cavernous hall. The scale of this underground space is humbling. Terrifying and deeply beautiful is a silent cathedral built entirely for the housing of words, rows upon rows of shelves. Stretch into the shadows receding beyond the reach of our lamp. The shelves are laden with cylindrical clay jars and tightly rolled scrolls bound with leather thongs. Each vessel holds a single breath of the ancient world awaiting its resurrection. The humidity here is perfect for conservation, constant and cool, a perfect environment. Engineers whose names are now utterly forgotten. We walk slowly down the central aisle, our footsteps muffled by a carpet of fine red dust. Every sound is absorbed instantly by the dense air and the porous rock. Only the quiet rasp of our own breathing remains. A small fragile sound in this monumental silence. Observe the scrolls closely. They are arranged by material, by date, by the obscure language they employ. Are sheets of thin beaten gold inscribed with cuneiform symbols. Their scrolls of treated papyrus stained dark with the blood of long vanished beetles used for the purple dye. There are heavy folios of cured calfskin, illuminated with pigments that still hold a surprising ghostly sheen. This is the library of the things that were lost, even while they were held. The collection of the dangerous ideas, the forbidden philosophies, the mathematics that broke the rules of geometry. Pause now and are marked only by a single piece of malachite fastened to the stone. This is unlike the others. It is protected not by clay jars, but by heavy iron lattice rusted shut with the moisture of countless years. We must look deeper here for the object of our long search, the cloaked manuscript. The archive speaks of only in the most cautious terms. It is said to hold the blueprint of a civilization that vanished before the pyramids were even rough drawings in the sandy. Pulled gently at the iron lock, and with a protesting groan, the mechanism gives way. The rust flakes off like dead, skin falling to the floor with a sound that seems impossibly loud. The scent that rises from this newly opened niche is distinct. It is the smell of old spice, of frankincense, and of something sharp and metallic like dried copper. Peer into the darkness of the shelf, and there is the object resting on a bed of finely shredded silk, now brittle and brown. It is not a scroll, nor is it a codex in the fashion we understand it. It is a small cylinder, perhaps a foot long and 4 inches in diameter. It is made of a polished, dense black stone unknown to any geology I have ever studied. The surface of this cylinder feels cool, almost unnaturally cold, even in the cool air of the crypti. Lifted carefully, cradling its immense weight, it's heavy, far heavier than its size suggests dense. With an inner substance that defies understanding, it is etched all over its surface, not with the flowing cursive script of the Egyptians or the angular marks of Sumer, but with symbols that are geometric, precise, cold, and utterly alien they seem to pulse slightly in the dim amber light, absorbing the color rather than reflecting it. We turn the cylinder slowly, allowing the light to travel across its intricate skin. The etching is shallow yet perfect, as if drawn not by a chisel but by a beam of focused energy. One particular band of symbols encircles the center of the cylinder. These glyphs are linked together in an unbroken chain, forming a continuous narrative of pure mathematics, or perhaps of pure sound. We lean closer, trying to decipher the immediate meaning of this ancient artifact. The air around the cylinder feels subtly different, vibrating with an almost imperceptible low hum. It is the sound of deep time contained, held silent within the black stone. Trace one finger lightly over the cold, precise surface of the cylinder. The symbol beneath my touch is a perfect circle divided by 5 radiating lines. Is a sigil of balance, or maybe a key to unlocking the hidden chambers of the heart. The sheer unknowable depth of this single object threatens to overwhelm the senses. We must study it carefully, silently, without hurry. Are merely the temporary guardians of this ancient cold wisdom. Let the mystery settle upon you now, like the drifting sand settling over a buried city. The black stone cylinder rests upon the table between us. Secrets are waiting to unfurl like the slow petals of a midnight flower. We do not rush the opening of this deep door. We simply observe the geometry, the pattern, the silent promise it holds. It is a language without vowels or consonants, a pure language of form and intention. As you gaze at the cylinder, at the intricate repeating pattern of the etching, your mind begins to soften to accept the impossibility of what it perceives. The symbols begin to drift loose from the black stone, floating gently into your inner vision. They spin slowly, turning into soft forms of light and shadow. A single line of text appears. Near the very top of the cylinder is the only that seems deliberately placed separate from the endless mathematical flow. I lean in close to the ancient cold material to read the single line of the introductory phrase. It is written in a language that predates Phoenician, that predates the very notion of written history, yet somehow impossibly your mind grasps the meaning of the sounds. The words are cold and resonant. The words are simply, we dreamt this sun before it was born. The line hangs in the hushed air, shimmering with a forgotten power. We dreamt the sun before it was born, a phrase of impossible scope, suggesting a memory reaching back beyond the formation of our star itself. This is the threshold of the deep story that to the secrets held in the black stone. The light of our amber lamp begins to dim now, as if the air itself is drawing the warmth away, but the single line of text etched upon the cylinder still glows softly. It waits for our return. It waits for the quiet breathing of the new dawn to reveal the next chamber of its secret. We dreamt the sun before it was born. Sleep now with this phrase echoing in the deep quiet rooms of your rest. History has just begun its long unfolding rest. Well, and drift down deeper still into the silence, into the soft, dark, welcoming mystery velvet curtain of the deep night still hangs heavy over the Nixa. Profound stillness permeates the earthen walls of the simple Athenian home. The air is cold, carrying the faint salient scent of the Saronic Gulf lying many miles distant. We rest now, suspended in a slow drift of perfect somnolence. The sound of your own breathing is the only measure of time within this deep. Ebb in silence, imagine the low slung roof above you, woven reeds and clay tiles resting on thick cypress beams. The floor beneath. Your mattress of straw and wool is packed earth, cool and unforgiving. It is the hour of stasis, the perfect quiet before Hypnos begins his slow, reluctant retreat. We lie within the heart of the oikos, the most private space of the ancient world. The outer door, made of heavy olive wood, is barred against the shadows and the few nocturnal roamers. A lamp of terracotta, perhaps, fueled by olive oil, sputtered and died hours ago, leaving only the pitch dark. No streetlights cast an artificial glow. Here, only the immense remote gleam of the celestial sphere, filtering through the narrow window slits. Feel the scratch of the woolen blanket. Against your skin, a coarse but necessary shield against the chill. Your body sinks further into the simple, bedding finding its absolute horizontal peace. The memories of the sunlit day, the debates in the Agora, the rigorous training in the gymnasium are utterly subsumed they. Our ghosts now faint echoes, waiting patiently for the dawn's slow summoning. Listen, not to the modern clamor, but to the profound historical silence of 400 years before the common era. Silence broken only by the occasional distant rhythmic call of the night. Watchman walking the steep cobbled lanes, he walks for the safety of the citizens guarding the deep sleep of the democracy sleep. Is the great equalizer here bringing the Kyrios, the master of the house, into the same unconscious realm as the lowest? Giles the servant, no status holds weight in the territory of the dream. The city of Athens waits patiently for the slow ritualistic breaking of the day. Is an ordinary day, not one of battle or grand legislative triumph, but one of quiet, necessary routine. The first subtle change comes not from the light, but from the quality of the stillness itself. Fractional shift in the air, a marginal lessening of the dense velvet darket. It is the liminal space between the two halves of the world. Far off down the road toward the Dippolon gate, the faint muffled bleating of a few goats being driven in from the pastures can just be heard. They are destined for the daily needs of the butcher or the sacrifice closer. Perhaps within the next courtyard, a rooster, a wild feathered chronometer, offers its first tentative. Croaked is not yet a crow, but a rough rusty clearing of the throat, acknowledging the pressure of the impending sunrise. Very first to stir within the oikos is the house slave or the women of the household. Their movement is trained to be utterly silent, practiced over a lifetime of avoiding the master's notice. A bare foot touches the cold earthen floor, a rustle, of course. Linen clothing their duty demands, they reclaim the fire, the central warmth of the home. The embers bank carefully in. The hearth beneath a layer of ash must be coaxed back to life. The slave blows gently, steadily, the sound a soft hushing whisper against the stone. The scent of dry olive wood and smoke begins to subtly overlay the cold night air. This is the signal that the day is truly beginning. The most crucial task of the Athenian morning begins now. The daily preparation of the staple food. It is the grinding of the grain. Imagine the sound of the stone, a slow, relentless grinding noise that forms the low bass note of the city's routine. The hand mill, the simple rotary quern, is a heavy implement of dark volcanic rock. The slave pours the dried barley a handful at a time into the central hole. One hand holds the vertical wooden handle, the body is bent into the curve of endless repetitive motion around. And round the heavy stone turn, the sound is not sharp or jarring, but deep and mesmerizing, a rhythmic frictional scraping this noise permeates. The walls a hypnotic drone signifying the simple heart. Labor required for basic survival. The barley is crushed between the two stones, breaking down into the necessary meal for the flatbread. The dust of the flour rises thick and fine, hanging the weak smoky light of the newly rekindled. It settles on the hair on the shoulders, on the smooth surface of the grinding stone. The labor is arduous, requiring steady strength, performed before the sun has even kissed the hills. Like a batust, meal accumulates slowly, steadily pouring out onto a leather. Skin placed below the stones. This flour will be mixed with water and kneaded into a stiff heavy dough called maza. Is the bedrock of the Athenian diet, the constant sustenance eaten by everyone from the wealthiest citizen to the simplest craftsman. Hear the rhythmic scrape and imagine the weight of the stone, the tension in the slave's forearms. This monotonous sound is intensely soporific, a constant reminder of the slow, unhurried pace of this ancient life. Men of the household, the citizen. Kyrios continues his deep sleep while this vital work is accomplished. He is protected by the labor of others, allowing him to conserve his strength for the political or military duties that define his citizenship. The sun is nearing the horizon now. A sliver of pale amber appearing above the distant Hymettus mountains. It casts long skeletal shadows within the main courtyard of the home. The warmth is still only a promise, but the visual world is starting to gain definition. The Kyrios, the master, stirs slowly, stretching beneath his blanket. He rises from the wooden recline, his sleeping couch. His first action is a simple purification, a ritual washing of the face and hands with cool water drawn from the large terracotta pithos jar. This water, often collected yesterday from the local fountain house or from a nearby well, is precious and used sparingly. Morning toilet is quick and austere. Elaborate soaps or perfumes are needed, only clean water and a small amount of oil rubbed into the skin to prevent dryness. He reaches for his primary garment, the chiton. A simple rectangle of linen or wool draped and fastened at the shoulders with pins or buttons. It falls loosely to his knees. Over this, he throws the hemation, the great outer cloak of thick wool that serves as both coat and blanket. Is an unstitched rectangle of fabric that must be draped skillfully over the left shoulder and across the body, leaving the right arm free. The drape is everything, a subtle indicator of status and dignity. Once dressed, the Kyrios is ready to take his first modest sustenance of the day. The akrotismathes is the simplest of meals. The freshly ground barley meal has now been baked or fried into a thick unleavened cake of maza. Is hard, heavy, and filling it is the bread of practicality, not luxury. This maza is dipped into wine called akritos, undiluted wine, though sometimes a little water is added for refreshment. Imagine the coarse texture of the maza in your hand, the faint bitterness of the wine as it softens the grain. This is the fuel of the ordinary Athenian statesman or potter or philosopher. The meal is eaten quickly, standing or sitting on a simple stool near the hearth. There is no languid breakfast table spread. The day's schedule is already pressing. The children of the house are beginning to stir their lessons with the pedagogue, or their chores await them. Wife of the house, the Kyria, remains largely sequestered in the gynekonitis, the women. Quarters attending to weaving and household management. Her day will be largely confined within these ancient stone walls. The Kyrios takes his last mouthful, preparing his mind for the demands of the city. His first destination will often be the barber, or the public bath, or perhaps directly to the Agora to meet with his peers. He checks his small leather purse containing his obols, the meager copper and silver coins he will need for transactions. The bar on the olive wood door is drawn back with a heavy grating sound. The air outside rushes in, carrying the combined smells of wood smoke, donkey droppings, and fresh morning dew. He steps out into the narrow lane, the first citizen of his household, ready to face the Athenian day, the grinding sound from the courtyard fades slightly behind him, but it does not cease. It will continue for hours, feeding the fundamental hunger of the city. The streets are still quiet, but a low murmur is beginning to build. The vendors are arranging their stalls near the Agora, spreading out their wares. The water sellers, carrying huge amphorae on their backs, walk with giddy rhythmic steps, calling out their services in a low monotone. Light grows stronger, painting the western face of the Parthenon a soft blush pink. The day of routine has fully begun. We follow the citizen now as he joins the slow current of ordinary men moving toward the center of the city. He passes homes identical to his own, simple, whitewashed structures with heavy doors and tiled roofs. He hears the muffled sounds of other households, stirring the clank of pottery, the low voices of instruction. He breathes in the scent of baking grain and the sharp smell of fresh turned earth from a nearby garden. His walk is steady, unhurried. Is going to the center of the world, to the Agora, the gathering place of commerce and politics. He walks beneath the shade of the fig trees. The dusty road crunching softly beneath his leather sandals. We walk with him effortlessly, drifting further into the rhythms of his commonplace life. The journey is slow measured, designed to prepare the mind for the complexities. Ahead, the great weight of sleep is lifted, but the heavy meditative pace of the morning remains. We move toward the heart of the city, the stone benches, the colonnades, the temples. The scent of dry thyme and sun-warmed dust fills the rapidly warming air. The sounds of the city are growing louder, but remain deeply rooted in the natural world. No engines, no jarring machinery, just the scrape of sandals, the lowing of oxen, the patient human voice. Pause by a small fountain basin, allowing the gentle splash of the running water to cleanse the mind of all lingering worry. Water is clear, cool, essential. The stone basin is etched with the marks of generations of hands reaching out for life, giving moisture feel. The coolness radiating from the ancient stone, the permanence of this simple daily act. This is the slow awakening of Athens, the methodical beginning of another necessary. Daily settle into this patient pace, feeling the rhythm of oldest routine. Take hold of the spirit. The path ahead leads to the shaded Stoa, where philosophers will soon begin their discussions, but for now there's only the quiet approach, the slow, steady, mesmerizing walk. We continue our journey toward the open square, the heart of the ancient city, waiting for the next scene to unfold. We move softly, slowly, inexorably drawn deeper into the quiet workings of the past. The sleeping chamber still held the deep coolness of the departing night. The last echoes of dream were dissolving like mist above the ancient hills. A faint trace of smoke from the oil lamp extinguished hours before it lingered near the ceiling rafters. These beams were dark cypress, wood rough, hewn by tools lost to deep history. The floor of packed earth felt solid and unyielding beneath a newly settled footing. Low grating sound of woven rush matting shifted slightly as the weight moved. The air was heavy yet clean, possessing the distinct dryness of attic air before the dew point rises. A simple rectangular stool stood near the climb, its surface polished only by time and human touch. The wood bore the faint sweet scent of cedar storage. The morning light began its infiltration. A thin shaft of pale gold angled sharply through a narrow, high window opening. It did not illuminate, but merely suggested the dust motes dancing in the stillness. The woolen cloak that had served as a blanket lay rumpled and warm, its coarse texture, a comforting reminder of simple protection. This plain fabric, dyed a deep, unassuming earth tone, was heavy with the honest weight of work moving slowly toward the open door frame where the light promised clarity. The sound of the sandals on the threshold. Stone was barely audible, a soft scrape of leather against the smooth limestone. This stone had been worn concave over generations by the slow, patient passing of many feet. It held the memory of countless mornings and evenings. The courtyard awaited, hushed and quiet. The center of the oikos remained slightly darker, protected from the direct eastern assault of the rising sun here. The low walls were covered in thick whitewash, renewed perhaps only last spring. The surface was uneven textured, reflecting light with a soft diffuse glow. A single vine, perhaps grape or ivy, climbed laboriously up the side of the wall, its leaves uncurled, slowly sensing the inevitable heat. The terracotta water jar stood near the peristyle. Shadow, it was large, and around its clay body deeply porous, it kept the drinking water miraculously cool through the process of slow, steady evaporation. A precious resource in this dry, demanding land. Scent of damp earth rose faintly from the small planted patch nearby, where perhaps a few small herbs like mint or basil were struggling to grow. The sound of the neighborhood was still muted, a layered blanket of distant activity. Rooster crowed far down the street, its sound thin and sharp, shattering the deep morning calm for just an instant. Then silence folded back over the scene, thicker and more profound than before. A servant, or maybe the wife, moved silently toward the small cooking area near the hearth. The preparation for the ariston, the simple morning meal, began. It was a ritual of minimal sound and maximum efficiency. The lighting of the fire required dry kindling. Scratch of the strike was almost swallowed by the stone walls. Fragile flame caught hold tentatively at first, then grew stronger, casting dancing Shadows across the clay walls of the hearth pit. The smoke remained thin and blue, ascending straight toward the open sky above the courtyard. A small, simple griddle was placed above the flame. Made of iron, it was black and heavy, holding the heat with reliable persistence. The morning staple was generally straightforward. Bay barley meal ground fine and mixed with water to form a simple gruel or perhaps a flat cake pressed thin. The fragrance of the toasting grain began to permeate the air, a wholesome smell that spoke of sustenance and the enduring cycle of harvest. A ceramic bowl waited ready to receive the cooked food, its inner surface painted with geometric patterns of faded red and black slip. These decorations were functional art, simple shapes that contained the eye without demanding attention. Barley cake ariston was sometimes eaten with a few figs dried and intensely sweet stored. Carefully through the long winter, their texture was dense, chewy, almost caramelized, or perhaps a few drops of olive oil, the lifeblood of Attica, poured slowly into the shallow depression of the gruel. The oil was pale yellow, almost green, depending on pressing it, possessed a faintly bitter note, a flavor that grounded the senses. The sound of the stirring spoon against the rough ceramic bowl was rhythmic, and low, a persistent whisper of preparation outside. The main door of the street was beginning its slow awakening, the sound of a heavily laden cart wheels turning clumsily over the rough cobblestones. Drew nearer, the driver uttered a low call, urging his oxen forward. Their hooves made a heavy, dull, thudding sound on the compacted dirt of the lane. Noise faded slowly, moving toward the main Agora, a distant magnet for all commerce. The Athenian day was ordered by the movement of the sun, not by manufactured clocks. The first hour was dedicated to these quiet routines, these necessary internal preparations, the washing of hands, the simple anointing with oil, the briefest of meals. The light shifted, moving higher, becoming wider and more insistent. The shadows shrank, drawing closer to the base of the walls. The stones now began to absorb the growing heat of the approaching mid-morning. Courtyard floor became warm to the touch. The low wooden table was brought out into the sunlit space, small sturdy legs planted firmly on the earth. The family gathered around the simple spread. The conversation, if any, was low, and deliberate words were chosen carefully, not wasted on trivialities. The focus was on the food, the necessity of the moment, the gathering of energy. The sound of the chewing was soft, a steady, humble rhythm. Air smelled strongly now of warm dust and roasting grain. A thin sheen of perspiration began to appear on the skin, a signal that the deep protective cool of the night was truly vanquished. The day belonged now to Phoebus Apollo. The heavy wool cloak was draped over a high stone walla. Temporary surrender to the rising temperature, its folds cast a deep blue shadow against the white limestone. The citizen prepares for the next phase, the mental transition from the enclosed domestic sphere to the open public world. The house keys, large and complex bronze artifacts, were secured. They represented the boundary of the privacy, the ownership of the oikos. Their weight felt substantial, a reassuring cool metal in the palm. Leather of the sandals was adjusted, pulled tight across the foot. The thongs were strong, well-worn, yet durable. A moment of pause before the heavy oak door was finally unbarred. The sliding of the large wooden bolt made a loud, resonant scraping sound. Definitive break with the silence of the private morning. The door opened outward, revealing the narrow, dusty street. The noise level immediately increased. The clamor of the city, previously muffled, now washed over the threshold. The glare of the high morning sun was suddenly intense, bouncing off the light-colored dust and the closely built stone facades. The transition required a moment of visual adjustment. Stepping out onto the street, the air was immediately drier and hotter. Lane was flanked by similar houses, their entrances shuttered or open, revealing brief glimpses into other quiet courtyards. The street itself was uneven, made of compacted refuse and ground-down stone. Rose and fell gently, following the contours of the natural landscape. A distinct smell dominated the street-level area, mixture of human activity, dust, donkey manure, and the faint scent of baking bread from a nearby shop. The soundscape was complex, a low-thrumming hum of human existence, children's voices, high and quick-shouted games around the corners, the steady drone of a water seller advertising his precious liquid cargo. His cry was melodic and repetitive, designed to carry long distances. A woman haggled sharply with a merchant selling fish, perhaps mullet or sea bass. The Fish were displayed openly on a flat reed mat, their scales reflecting. The argument was spirited but short-lived, a necessary of the daily interaction. The citizen began his measured slow walk toward the Agora, the heart of the city. His posture was upright, his gait steady. He wore the simple himation, a large piece of woolen cloth draped carefully over the left shoulder. Its folds were elegant yet practical, shielding him from the harshest direct sunlight. The texture of the wool against the skin was familiar, rough yet reliable. He passed by a small fountain fed by an underground aqueduct. The sound of the continuous slow trickle of water was hypnotic and soothing. A small crowd gathered, filling their own earthenware jugs. The liquid spilled occasionally onto the pavement, darkening the stone temporarily. Moisture evaporated almost instantly in the dry heat. The shadow cast by the high wall of a public building offered a brief respite, a momentary cool pocket in the growing warmth. He noticed the deep etchings in the stone blocks marks left by the masons. Tools centuries ago, each line spoke of careful craftsmanship, of immense effort and patient labor. Stone itself was Pentelic marble, pale, almost luminous when freshly cut. But here, weathered by wind in time to a creamy, warm ochre, he saw a group of older men already gathered near a sheltered portico, engaged in the timeless Athenian pastime of serious discussion. And their robes were perhaps slightly finer, indicating a degree of leisure and status. Their voices were low and intense, punctuated by the sharp gesture of a hand discussing politics, philosophy, or maybe just the price of grain this season. The walk continued past small workshops where craftsmen were already intensely occupied. The sound of a saw biting into hardwood was sharp, and Insistente sandal maker tapped rhythmically, shaping leather or wooden form. The smell of cured hides and strong glue hung heavy near his open stall. Pace of the walk was deliberately unhurried. There was no need for haste in this measured existence. Every action was allocated its proper time, its necessary duration. The citizen felt the weight of the sun increasing on his exposed head. The sky was an intense, flawless blue, a deep sapphire dome stretching endlessly. A few distant clouds, white wisps, sailed high above the Acropolis, their shadows barely perceptible on the earth below. He reached a wider thoroughfare, a main artery, leading directly into the Agora here. The crowd density increased dramatically. The sound became a continuous roar, a vast composite of hundreds of voices and movements. The air was thick with dust stirred up by countless feet, and the exotic smells of trade mingled together. Spices from the Aegean, saffron and cumin, were faint but detectable. Woven linen from Egypt, smooth and pale, was carried high by a merchant. Its texture seemed impossibly fine compared to the rough Attic willow. Stall offered grapes already slightly warm from the sun. Their skins were dusted with blue and a bluish-white coating. They promised immediate sharp sweetness, a momentary quenching of thirst. Ground here was unevenly paved with larger, more significant stones. Clatter of his sandals was louder here, more assertive. He passed the stoa, a long covered walkway designed for contemplation and shelter. The columns were massive and imposing, silent sentinels guarding the public space. Their fluted surfaces ran upward toward the deep shadowy roof. The depth of the shadow was immense and inviting, offering a perfect refuge from the solar intensity. He entered the cool, dark recess of the stoa for a brief moment of transition. The change in light was immediate, restful to the eye. Silence within was relative, a deep, quiet murmur compared to the frenzy outside. He saw scribes setting up their low portable desks, preparing their styluses and papyrus scrolls, ready to record transactions or draft official communications. The texture of the papyrus was brittle and dry, rustling faintly as it was unrolled. The ink was dense, black-smelling, faintly of lamp soot and resin. A man sat nearby, meticulously weighing small silver coins, the precious owls of Athens. His bronze scale was perfectly balanced, delicate, and precise. The tiny weights were placed carefully on one pan. The sound of the silver coin settling on the brass scale was a distinct clear ping. The transaction was slow, deliberate, ritualistic. The silver gleamed pale and cool, absorbing the little light that reached the shade. This was the economic heart, the pulse point of the city. Every piece of food. Every building material, every ship was bought or sold or recorded here, moved slowly out of the shade back into the intense light of the open Agora square. The vastness of the space was humbling it. It was not a sterile open square, but a complex living organism lined. With altars, monuments, and the temporary structures of countless vendors, he paused near a monumental bronze statuet's surface was oxidized green and weathered by the elements. The depiction was stern and heroic, a reminder of civic duty and military excellence. He stopped briefly to speak with a fellow citizen. Was simple, courteous, and formal, inquiring about family health and the latest political news from the assembly. Exchange was measured paced by the conventions of Athenian society. The weight of the tradition was comforting, not oppressive. It provided structure and predictable rhythm to the unpredictable life. The dust on the ground was fine, almost talcum like it coated the sandals and the lower hem of the Himadion. It rose in small clouds, with every movement softening the edges of the visible world. Atmosphere felt electric, charged with the energy of thousands of minds. Meeting, the sense changed, becoming sharper, more mineral. The smell of hot stone, baking under the intense sun, was paramount, mixed with the strong aroma of sacrificial fires burning elsewhere in the precinct. Smoke carrying the prayers and offerings of the citizens. Upward a vendor sold small terracotta oil lamps, simple and shaped their clay fired to a muted reddish orange. He handled one briefly, feeling the smooth, cool clay. Imagined the small pool of oil. The single wick, the tiny flame that would conquer the deepest darkness. The object was functional, beautiful in its pure utility. He continued his trajectory toward the building designated for the day's political gathering. The path led slightly uphill past the imposing foundations of earlier structures. Rubble and fractured marble lay casually discarded, remnants of temples destroyed centuries before, now forming of the path a constant physical reminder of the deep history beneath the modern pavement. The sun was nearing its zenith, the hour of deepest heat approaching. The noise began to slacken slightly as those sense sought shelter. The light was now blindingly white, stripping the color from the landscape. Only the deepest shadows retained their intensity. He reached the steps of the assembly building. Steps were broad and low, made for slow ascent. The marble felt searing hot beneath the leather of the sandals. The air here was thinner, cleaner, smelling less of commerce and more of stone and civic purpose. He entered the great hall, a cool, cavernous space designed for gathering and debate. The sound of voices, amplified by the hard stone surfaces, echoed and resonated. A deep, sonorous buzz, a hive of focused intellect. The atmosphere was formal, constrained by the gravity of the decisions to be made. He found his seat, a simple, low bench made of wood. Was hard, smooth, worn to a sheen by repeated use. He settled in, allowing the coolness of the great stone room to wash over him. Light entering through the high apertures was filtered and soft. A long, slow day stretched ahead, filled with measured argument and careful deliberation. The weight of his civic duty was felt not as a burden, but as a necessary privilege. Ancient stone walls held the voices of countless generations before him, whispering silent counsel to the present moment. The dust settled slowly from the air, a slow, patient descent. The feeling of deep immersion into the ongoing life of Athens was complete. The outside world, with its harsh sunlight and frenetic commerce, was temporarily forgotten. Only the internal rhythm of democratic engagement remained. The texture of the rough tunic beneath the Himadion felt reassuring, a second skin, worn smooth by many years of daily use. Focus narrowed to the man standing at the podium, his voice ringing clearly across the assembled citizens. Words were chosen meticulously, their arguments constructed with painstaking precision. The slow, steady rhythm of Athenian public life unfolded. Cadence of thought and speech that resisted all haste, the moments stretched out long and deliberate each phrase, each proposed law, each civic obligation demanded full measured attention. Sound of a cough carried across the chamber. A sharp, brief intrusion, then the deep quiet returned, broken only by the low, steady sound of the orator's voice. The weight of the accumulated hours pressed gently downward. Heat outside was now at its maximum intensity and oppressive silence, but here within the stone walls there was only stillness. and shadow. The air moved slowly, a gentle stirring of trapped coolness. Fly buzzed lazily near a high window, caught in a shaft of pale light. Its small sound magnified in the vast stillness. The long, slow sleep of the midday sun was approaching. The arguments would pause soon for the required rest, a necessary retreat from the overwhelming power of the sun. The rhythm of Athenian life was utterly synchronized with the cycles of nature, respecting the necessity of rest, the requirement for shade. Closed his eyes briefly, leaning back against the hard stone wall behind the bench, allowing the sounds to wash over him without demanding interpretation. The deep, continuous murmur of the debate became abstracte, wave of hypnotic sound carrying him further downward, deeper into the cool, calm safety of the ancient assembly. The texture of the marble under his hand was cool, solid, dependable, a connection to the bedrock of this enduring civilization. The weight of the day felt momentarily suspended, a perfect equilibrium between effort and stillness. Sunlight outside began its infinitesimal slow arc downward toward the west. Intensity would soon begin its decline. The shadows would lengthen, becoming blue and cool once more. The anticipation of the evening meal, the return to the quiet oikos, these thoughts were distant, faint anchors in the sea of public discourse. He focused once more on the speaker's voice, a low, steady drone describing the logistics of the city grain supply necessary, and utterly unhurried detail, the sheer volume of olive oil required for the annual festivals. The meticulous record keeping etched into existence on wax tablets. Sound of the stylus scratching across the wax was audible, faintly high-pitched recording. The immutable facts of Athenian necessity, the slow turning of the minutes measured not by ticks, but by the progression of the sun across the stone floor. Movement of the light beam defining the passage of time, timeless, enduring rhythm of civic life, deeply calming, deeply constant, deeply true. The cool air of the gorge is suddenly electric with anticipation. It moves around us like a curtain of velvet drawn aside by unseen hands. We are deep now within the narrow winding passage that guards the city's heart. The vertical sandstone walls rise dizzyingly high toward the thin crescent of the desert. Moon, they are etched with the subtle colors of time-pale rose, deepening to rust where the ancient water flowed. Listen only to the steady rhythm of your own breath within this overwhelming silence. Silence that seems not merely the absence of sound, but a deliberate holding back. The rock absorbed all noise, allowing only the softest whispers to survive. The transit, imagine? The Nabatean caravans moving through this throat centuries ago. The weighted tread of camels bearing silks and incense from distant ports. Yet, tonight there's only the whisper of the wind carrying fine grains of ochre dust that settles upon our skin like the softest of sleeping powders. Feel the profound coolness emanating from the shadow side of the carved stone. It is a monumental stillness that anchors the mind to this single perfect moment. Every turn of the serpentine path promises revelation, yet delays its fulfillment. We move slowly, deliberately, respecting the gravity of this sacred approach above. Small devotional niches are carved into the high, inaccessible ridges, for prayer for the minor deities of the road and the protecting spirits of the mountain, empty now save for the smooth polish left by the fierce desert air. They remind us that this passage was designed not for speed, but for reverence, a slow unveiling of the profound spiritual engineering that underlies Petroluk. Closely at the perfect precision of the hidden water channels beside the pathway, they demonstrate the Nabateans' masterful understanding of gravity and conservation, harnessing every fleeting rain shower, every drop of dew within the arid landscape. They made the desert bloom through ingenuity, through unwavering devotion to survival. This civilization did not merely exist here. It demanded existence from the reluctant rock. And now, as we drift forward, the light ahead begins to change subtly. The narrow slit of the gorge allows only a fractured stream of silver moonlight. But as the opening widens, the illumination intensifies, becoming warmer. Deeper, a radiant hue begins to permeate the closing walls of the passage. Is the color of iron oxide, of ancient blood dried into the matrix of the stone. The rosered city begins its slow, deliberate appearance before our rested eyes. Wait, patiently for the final curtain to withdraw for the true scale to be comprehended. The rock seems to yield reluctantly, parting just enough to frame the impossible vision, and there it stands, defying all expectation, all terrestrial logic, Hakazna, the treasury misnamed by those who sought only gold. Its colossal Hellenistic facade rises upward, carved downward from the living mountain, not built upward stone by stone, but excavated, released from the monolithic wall. Deeply fluted Corinthian columns shimmer under the faint atmospheric luminescence. Stone gleams with an inner light and amber radiance banked. By the centuries, its architectural vocabulary speaks of permanence, of devotion, of colossal ambition. This was not a treasury for earthly wealth, but a place of sacred remembrance, a mausoleum, perhaps for a great king or a temple dedicated to the star. Watchers observe the perfect symmetry, the balance of light and shadow upon the facade. Deeply recessed upper story holds mythical figures worn smooth by endless wind. They stand as silent guardians over secrets sealed long ago within the stone, are merely temporary observers pausing at the gateway to eternity. Scale of the carving is humbling, forcing the mind to slow, to rest, to accept. The fine desert dust has softened the sharp edges of the acanthus leaves and the pediments gimps. The entire structure, the texture of old velvet, of ancient sleeping silks. Feel the profound vibration of history resonating from the stone beneath your feet. It is the echo of the mason's chisel. The slow rhythmic strike that shaped this immense chamber. Now shift your gaze away from the spectacle of the facade itself. Look instead at the deep black rectangle at its center, the main doorway. Is the invitation into the cold heart of the carved mountain. Beyond that threshold lie the inner chambers, the silent empty halls of devotion. They are rooms of absolute darkness, chambers hewn for contemplation or burial. We know that the true purpose of Petra extended far beyond commerce. It was a vast necropolis, a city dedicated to managing the transition of the soul. The living city was merely the temporary anteroom to this monumental city of the dead. We sense the cool draft emerging from that darkness, an exhalation of centuries of quietude. Carries the faint scent of dry earth and mineral dust and something else, indefinable, perhaps the residue of incense burned during the last great Nabatean ceremony. Are standing at the nexus of the desert world and the cold celestial spheres. The Nabateans were skilled astronomers, charting the intricate patterns of the night sky. They used the movements of the stars to align their tombs, their altars, their sacred space. They mapped the cosmos onto the geometry of the mountains. This facade is not merely architecture. It is a calendrical device, a stone. Clocket marks the precise rising and setting points of specific stars. During crucial seasons, look up toward the massive urn carved high upon the pinnacle of the treasury legend. It says it contains untold riches, and that many a desperate traveler has shot at it trying to break the stone, but it is entirely solid, a symbolic receptacle, perhaps for the soul itself. Notice how the moonlight now casts the urn's shadow in a long dark line. It falls directly upon a specific feature at the base of the structure. A small shallow depression almost overlooked beneath the sheer weight of the doorway. Is here that the air seems strangely different, thinner, cooler, more focused. A slight shimmering effect plays across the surface of the pale sandstone. At this very spot, it is not reflection, nor is it merely moonlight interacting with the moisture. It is a faint internal luminescence, a soft phosphorescent glow emanating from within the rock. The ancient stone seems momentarily porous, allowing a subtle internal light to escape. It pulses gently at the speed of a very slow human heartbeat. An inexplicable resonance, a sign perhaps that something remains active here, a forgotten mechanism of chamber pressure, a release of ancient sealed energy. We are drawn toward this quiet, mysterious glow at the foot of the colossal carving. It feels like the true focus of the entire monumental effort, the destination of the star map. What did the architects intend to mark with such precision beneath the great symbolic urn? What knowledge or item or final message lies concealed behind this faint, steady pulsing? The silence here deepens, becoming absolute, focused entirely upon this small area. Like, just rest now and allow the cool, hypnotic rhythm of this deep desert mystery to envelop you. Let the rosary glow soothe your mind and quiet your weary thoughts. We will remain here together, observing this slow, gentle unfolding until the moment the faintest sign of dawn arrives to reveal its deeper meaning. Sleep now. Deep and safe within the shadow of the ancient mountain, we drift toward the mystery of the living light within the silent stone. The deep quiet still held the city captive. A heavy mantle of obsidian velvet cloaked the sloping roofs of the Kerameikosalans. Was the only architect now building halls of profound somnolence between ancient stone dwellings. The air, thick and cool, carried the mineral scent of wet marble, and the distant salt tang of the Aegean breath waiting patiently for the eastern light. This hour was not meant for human sound only. The ghost echo of yesterday's shouts section to the alleyways remained a hushed testament to enduring stillness. We drift now through the narrow passage, where high walls of sun-baked mud brick rise, keeping the deepest slumber safe within the moon. A spent silver drachma dipped slowly towards the western horizon, leaving behind a sky of deepening indigo above the sloping ridge of the Acropolis. Single star held bright, suspended like a drop of frozen liquid memory. It watched over the sleeping Agora, the silent long colonnades of the Stoa Poikovine, the deserted benches of the Nix Hill, waiting for the weight of day to arrive. But the day began first in the Oikos, private inner world of Athenian home, where the hearthfire guarded the sleep of those who dwelt under its smoky shadowy. Single faint movement now disturbs the hush, not a spoken word, but the softest scraping sound from the women's quarters, the Ginakonitish. First arise must feed the household gods, and start the slow, meticulous process of the dia thin low sound, like stone against stone. The soft grinding of the handmill begins. A mortar of heavy volcanic rock held the rough kernels of barley grain being crushed deliberately, patiently, into the coarse flour needed for the morning flatbread. The noise is not sharp or jarring, but a repetitive, rhythmic lullaby of labor preceding light is the ancient soundtrack of Athens, waking a sound heard across centuries, unchanged. The rhythmic push and pull of muscle and stone, the gentle puff of starchy dust rising. The deep sepia gloom of the kitchen room lamp, a small terracotta dish holding oil flickers, hesitantly casting tall, uncertain shadows that dance like nervous specters on the white plaster walls. The scent of cold ashes and banked charcoal is strong mingling, now with the sharp, earthy smell of the milling barley and the faint, distant olive oil that permeates everything. Life here is slow and measured by necessity. There is no rush towards complexity, only the simple, undeniable requirement of sustenance. A hand that turns the mill is strong and accustomed, guided by centuries of inherited domestic routine. The small courtyard, the alley remains damp with night dew. The mosaic floor feels intensely cool underfoot even. The few potted herbs, thyme and oregano stand rigid, stiffened by the pre-dawn chill. Soon the master will rise from his sleeping couch in the Andron, the men's primary chamber. His slumber has been deep and undisturbed, necessary reservoir of peace before the noise, the political arguments, the long civic demands that structure the life of a citizen. He sleeps wrapped in a heavy woolen blanket, thick brown textile woven locally, perhaps in Sunnivi protection against the attic night air. The oil lamp on the nearby small table has guttered low, its wick nearly drowned in the thick residue of burned olive oil. But the rising light is already promising rescue, a faint silvering along the highest ridge tiles, indicating the invisible slow ascent of Helios. The master stareth, now a rustle of heavy cloth, the slight creak of the wooden climb, the sleeping platform. His movements are unhurried, deliberate. He does not need to look outside to know the hour. Intensity of the quiet tells him all he needs. The world outside remains deeply submerged. That final hypnotic state of near sleep, he rises to stand upon the cold clay floor, the brief shock of the coolness grounding him in this slow-turning moment of the ancient world. The first act is always the simple application of water a slave waits patiently with a shallow bronze bowl and a clean cloth of rough linen. There's no complex plumbing here, no extravagant flowing water systems within the oikos walls, only the careful, measured use of stored rain or the precious jugs hauled in the evening. Prior from the nearest public fountain house, he rinses the sleep from his face and hands, a brief moment of sharp, cold refreshment. The linen towel rough against his skin is invigorating, waking the slow blood beneath the surface. The process is minimal. An efficient, quick, simple cleansing necessary for dignity, but nothing approaching elaborate bathing yet. That luxury is reserved for the afternoon. Gymnasium or the quiet hours of the public baths. If time and funds allowed such indulgence, he reaches. For his simple tunic, the kidney single length of white linen, draped and pinned around the shoulders, allowing for easy movement, and the maximum passage of the coming heat, his simple leather sandals are waiting strapped quickly to his dite mundane act repeated 10,000 times. This simplicity, this dedication to the necessary, is the framework of his entire existence. No wasted energy, no excessive display. Everything speaks of civic restraint and the required humility of the free. The manly smell of the milling grain now drifts closer, a promise of the thin porridge waiting. Earliest morning meal called the acritisma, simple, sustaining blend of barley gruel or wine-soaked bread. The master moves slowly towards the central courtyard. The air changes subtly here, becoming softer, brighter. As the first true shaft of amber light pushes past the outer walls of the home, it illuminates the courtyard floor in a precise rectangle. Turning the cool, damp tiles to warm ochre is a moment of profound visual silence. The day is truly beginning now, not with shouts or urgency, but with the quiet affirmation of light. A new day for the philosopher, the potter, the merchant, another of routine etched in ancient stone, other 24 hours to fulfill the duties of the quiet, ordinary citizen of glorious Athens. He pauses in the light, listening to the persistent, low scratch of the grinding stone. The sound of necessity, the rhythm of deep history, a sound designed only for profound, hypnotic sleep. Dusty. Breath of Attica rising slow as the sun clears the low roofliness, a pale light spills over the dried earth. Deep coolness of the ancient stone yielding to the inevitable warmth of the Athenian day. The world remains hushed save for the gentle scrape of a broom, a simple rhythm against the worn threshold. Sound whispers of routine, of repetition off 10,000 mornings precisely like Insomnia. Profound lack of urgency governs the early hours. Olive oil lamp extinguished its thick smoke. Desolate living, only the faint odor of burned wick and residues. Air itself carries the weight of history not in grand monuments, but in the persistent scent of time in. The dry, grainy aroma of stored grain move now toward the Agora, vast open heart of the city where the pulse of ordinary life beats slowest and yet most consistently ground beneath our imaginary. Sandalous, uneven, dry, and packed hard by generations of feet is the color of bleached bone and soft ochre, a gentle dust. Clings to the lower folds of the rough linen cloak, a soft, persistent embrace. A distant murmuring begins to clarify now. A chaotic noise, but a structured resonance, a lowing of a few goats tethered near the outer limit, steady metallic clink of a merchant setting up his bronze scale. Each sound is discreet and separate, floating upon the heavy morning quiet pass beneath. The high shadow of the Stoa Poikila, the painted porket's inner walls were cloaked in images of battle, but the shadow it casts upon the ground is one of profound peace, a long strip of cool relief here. Older men gather their voices, low discussing the price of barley, or the latest gossip from the Piraeus port there. Conversation drifts like smoke, unimportant, unnecessary. Merely present marble columns are massive, thick, and cool to the touched with the minute abrasions of centuries of passing hands. Trace the line where the sunlight ends and the cool shade begins a definite boundary marking the separation. Between the private quiet and the public slow theater of the Marketh, sun climbs imperceptibly slow its rays, beginning to penetrate the upper layers of the thick morning, air revealing millions of suspended dust motesti. Glitter momentarily like slow falling gold flakes bore descending to the earth. They came from ocean, is hypnotic, barely perceptible. Flow of time in this ancient place is viscous, slow moving. There's no haste, no frantic movement. To man slowly unfolds a piece of pale goat cheese wrapped in a fig leaf. Process takes several minute tests. Gentle, careful unwrapping, the quiet inspection. Deliberate folding of the discarded leaf is watching the day unfold before him, not participating fully, but observing its Measured or revolve near the fountain house, the creative sound of water is a thin, persistent drizzly, a slow drip into a collection basin of porous. Stone at stone is perpetually damp, darkened with moss holding the memory of countless draughts of cool water the Athenian women move to in this source, their pottery jars resting balanced on hip or shoulder. Clay is a muted reddish-brown, and the surface of the amphora is slightly rough to the fingertips. Weight of the full jar is considerably. The movement is fluid, graceful, practicere, silent ceremony of necessity. Sound of their woven sandals on the pavement is a soft, rhythmic shuffling, a steady undercurrent beneath the louder sounds of the vendors. Focus on the texture of a single wicker basket woven from dried reeds, the fibers, dry, brittle, sharp at the broken edges it holds. A measure of dried lentils or chickpeas, mole hard, spherical, the color of pale earth. Merchant scoops them slowly with a small wooden loud leathy sound. Is a dry rustle, a quiet poringa, soft whisper of abundance and basic sustenances. Entire scene possesses a velvet stillness. Colors are muted, the sounds contain the strongest color is the deep dark blue of the southern sky, which seems impossibly vast and far removed from the slow workings below. A cotter sits cross-legged by his stall, surrounded by unfinished kylakes and sky for drinking. Cups of simple design their surface air, unpainted, dull. Matte red clay, he holds a small sponge moistening the rim of a pisset, the movement of his thumb is minute. Exacting, a craftsman lost in the deep meditation of simple task. Air smells faintly of fired earth and drying wine. Residue sun, now high. Enough to cast short, sharp shadows makes the marble of the temples glow with an internal pale yellow light. But we remain here in the shaded everyday. Agora, where the real architecture is the routine itself, structure of the common weight of the world is manageable, reduced to the simple exchange of copper obols for necessities. Low buzz permeates. The entire space is the sound of thousands of low conversations, blended Greek dialects spoken soft and slow, not rushed declamation, but gentle exchange of thought. Voices rise and fall like the slow breathing of the city itself. Warmth is beginning to deepen, pushing the coolness of the morning into the deeper. Shadows seek the shelter of the stoa of Talos, a long cool colonnade of immense stone here. The air is noticeably cooler by several degrees. A gentle breeze sometimes finds its way through the open side, carrying the faintest hint of salt from the distant. Sea floor is smooth marble worn down in the center. Paths where the highest traffic flows. Surface is slick and cool. Imagine resting a bare hand upon its smooth feeling. The immediate cold withdrawal of heat from the skina. Moment of deep physical refreshment. A vendor slowly stacks small amber twigs, string them on a woven math. Insects hover lazily, slow moving in the thickening heat. Figs are shriveled, dark and sweet smelling. A concentrated essence of the summer sunic. One placed with precision. No rushing, the alignment must be perfecta. Quiet respect for the meager measure of the harvest. Silence stretches between the moments of small commerceth. Athenian citizen does not rush his meal, his conversation, or his movement. Day is an ample vessel containing more than enough time for every small necessary action. Hear the faraway sound of a hammer striking iron. Slow measured work of the smithy near the western gate, not a fast, urgent ringing, but a dull, heavy, rhythmic thud. Sound travels across the dry, open space, muffled by the heat, and the distancy is the sound of enduring labor's creation of simple tools and basic hinges, necessities of a slow-moving world. A small dog drowses in a patch of dust near a wooden cart, its breath visible in the slight rise, and followed its flank completely, unafraid, utterly still. A small picture of perfect easy. Dust is warm around it, insulating it from the stone. Sound of water now becomes more inviting to imagination, drifting toward the coolness of the deep wellware. The air is chilled and damp, rough rope sliding against the stone lip of the well. Head is slow, descending and ascending movement. Sound of the bucket hitting the surface of the water, a dull, echoing splash from the deep darkness. Relief of the cold, heavy pulse water itself is clear and very cold carrying. The faint taste of the limestone bedrock watch an elderly Athenian citizen, his skin deeply creased by sun and time, drinking slowly from a terracotta cube, his eyes half closed, enjoying the singular pleasure of the draught. Does not talk. He does not hurry, simply exists in that moment. of perfect fulfillment, the rhythm of life. Here is deeply tied to the sun's traveling. The growing heat of the mid-8th shadows now are at their shortest, deepest, bluest point, a natural signal for the retreat. Agora will soon thin out the commerce, slowing to a trickle of time for the quiet meal, the shared wine, the unburdening of the afternoon heave. Sun seems to pause directly overhead, a blinding white disk of intense energy making the surface of the dry clay shimmer. Notice the colors of the women's garments, not the bright dyes of the rich, but the pale, bleached hues of the common. People of white linen, faded yellows, soft gray colors that absorb the least amount of heat clothing, designed for the enduring climate. The texture of the wool cloak draped over the shoulder is coarse, rough against the neck, but offers insulation against both the morning chill and the midday heat it holds. The scent of wood smoke and outdoor air, a deep, comforting scent of simple home life. A small bronze coin is dropped onto a stone table. Sound is a clear, ringing tone. Short, sharp, definite is the sound of completion of transaction to final note. In a moment of slow negotiation, the coin is worn smooth by years of handling it. Features blurred, its weight negligible, but its function is absolute. It signifies the day's small measure earned. Rest will allow our focus to settle entirely on the stillness. Lack of imperative, the quiet acceptance of the dust motes still dance in the high amber light, but their movement is slower now. The air itself feels heavier, denser, more difficult to stir. The entire city enters a state of deep suspension, a midday hush. Settling over the winding streets, the narrow alleys where the high walls provide deep shed eddy. Air is cool and stagnant, hair smelling slightly of damp earth and stored household goods. Momentary refuge from the sun's immense power, the sound of a door being slowly drawn, shoot a wooden bolt sliding into its socket. Deep quiet of the private home settling at the floor inside is packed. Earth cool and dry, covered sometimes with simple woven reed mats. The walls are plain whitewashed limestone, air reflecting the soft internal light, the deep sense of ancient domesticity. Quiet shared meal of bread soaked in olive oil and a few Alvician. Without conversation, simply enjoy the concentration required for sleep is the same concentration rate for the perfect enjoyment of a small, simple thing, the smooth, cool surface of the stone. Bench, slow, steady chewing, the taste of salt and eartha, deep satisfaction, rooted in simplicity. Slow, rhythmic grinding of a small hand mill is audible from a neighboring courtyard. Sound is a sustained, low grating, whispereth effort required to turn the heavy upper stone. Slow creation of the flour for the next day's bread labor, intertwined with the deep silence of the afternoon. The shadows begin their slow, subtle process of lengthening minute by minute. The blue stretch of shade expands, reclaiming the open spaces previously dominated by the white clearness. Slow change is the turning point of the day, descent toward the coolness of the evening. The air remains warm, but the harsh intensity is receding. The soft relief begins to spread over the dusty landscape. Heat releases its hold gently. Slow lie we are completely immersed in this quiet passage of Tima, floating presence in the ancient Athenian afternoon, where the only measurement of significant size, the shifting angle of the soon end, the depth of the shadow cast by the plain walther, is nothing important to discuss, nothing vital to achieve. Only the slow, comforting movement toward the cooling earth, sensation of the rough fiber of the cushion beneath the head, simple scent of dried grass and clean linen, profound assurance that nothing is rushing forward. Hours move like molasses, thick and unhurried, carrying us deeper into the slow, pervasive silence. That distant sounds of the city are now only faint whispers. Hum of the Agora is almost gotten replaced by the low, constant drone of insects in the warmth. Sound that lulls rather than alarms, the sound of deep summer security. Slow breathing of the ancient world focus on the texture of the clay roof tiles overhead, darkened by moss and soot. The slightly curved surface bearing the last intensity of the direct sun, the radiate a gentle passive warmth. Deep low heat that comforts rather than overwhelms. A soft amber light filters through the small upper window, illuminating a small patch of the dusty floor. The light is soft, diffused, without edges. Color of old honey and pale wynite moves across the floor at an infinitesimal pace, marking the sure, steady passing of the restful hour. Feel the weight of the rough, simple blanket draped over the lower limbs, a comforting presence of coarse woven wool. Material itself speaks of enduring labor and The basic security of the Athenian homia, deep, slow peace settles over the limbs, and the min thoughts are like slow-moving water currents, flowing, not rushing, tumbling, or turning. Each idea is given space to dissipate and dissolvento. The larger pool of quiet awareness afternoon stretches out endlessly, a timeless space of perfect rest. Weight of the city, the weight of the dale, resting in the stillness of the sun's slow descenty. The very ground is warm beneath our shoulder. The accumulated heat of the morninga, slow, steady anchor of warmth were suspended in this golden hort, slow, quiet rhythm of ordinary life here. Constant, unchanging backdrop to deep, restorative sleep, cooling air beginning to stir at the edges. Promise of the long velvet night, soon to commute deep, slow breath of ancient Greece prevailing. The cooling air descends heavily upon the skin. Gathers like mist within the hollows of the ancient stone. We stand suspended in the deep stillness of the archive, place where the years have pooled into centuries of silence. The light of the slow lantern pools upon the central altar. It illuminates the globe we found resting upon the marble plinth. The material is a solidified amber of impossible purity, holding the fossilized memory of light itself, is not merely a model of the heavens. It is a breathing map etched with purpose and celestial dread. The constellations here are unfamiliar. They drift according to rules forgotten by the later ages. Each line, each circle, each minute diamond of light is a calculation. Run your mind along the cold curvature of the polished sphere. Feel the sheer weight of astronomical time encoded there. The symbols are delicate, fine as spider silk, yet carved into the hardened resin with immense slow force. There's a central arrangement that draws the eye downward. A configuration of three vast suns moving toward a singular point. This is the heart of the message. A prediction whispered across millennia, the approach of a great and rare convergence. Ancients spoke of the alignment of the quiet sky moment when the very pillars of reality shift ever so slightly, and underneath this complex web of moving lights, a singular glyph remains distinct and profoundly troubling. It is etched deeper than the rest, a symbol that feels misplaced among the stars. The form of a plume or a vast silent wing drifting downward through the dark abyss implies motion without effort. A slow, steady descent into the plane of the mortal world. We lean closer, listening for the frequency that emanates from the amber. It hums, a quiet, powerful chord that resonates deep within the bones. The globe is vibrating with the ghost of calculation. The echo of minds focus entirely upon the distant cold fire. They were marking not a passage of time, but the location of a destination. A point in the sky that corresponds to a place on the earth, a hidden center connected utterly to the fate of the stars. This is the deep history unwritten in the scrolls of the surface world. A secret whispered from the darkness to the silent dust. Light catches the edge of the wing symbol once more. It flares briefly in the amber depth, and then the flickering lantern pauses in its breath. The shadow of the wing enlarges. Suddenly it stretches vast and indistinct across the ancient stone wall. The stillness in this deep chamber is not emptiness. It is a held breath, a waiting silence that presses against the ears. We feel the gravity of the earth itself pulling us downward, drawing the senses closer to the cold marble floor. Shift in the pressure of the air occurs, subtle, as the movement of sand through an hourglass is not a draft nor a physical sound, but the heavy implication of presence just beyond the circle of light. Something has been awakened by our scrutiny. That observes from the hushed velvet shadows of the passage. Being cloaked entirely in the stillness of deep time, its awareness settles upon us like a fine layer of cold gray ash. The cold is suddenly sharper, a piercing awareness that we are standing in the very locus of its sleep. The ancient stone absorbs every sound we dare not make. The only movement is the slow, silent turning of the cosmic sphere. It continues its endless rotation, pulling the gilded stars and the prophetic symbols through the dark, and the wing symbol remains utterly fixed, staring out from the heart of the amber toward the hidden watcher. This is the threshold between worlds, the thin veil held taut by the sheer willpower of the builders, and now that veil feels fragile, stretched almost to breaking by the gaze of the unseen thing. We linger here, motionless in the faint amber illumination, suspended between the decoded history and the immediate mystery. Air grows heavier, still thick with the scent of ozone and forgotten coppery. Silent current flowing from the deeper unlit corridors. Sleep now deeply and without hurry. Let the weight of the ancient. Stone anchor your thoughts. We will wait here in the silence, holding the dim light against the expanding dark while the wing descends slowly across the infinite canvas and the presence watches, waiting for the moment when the last light yields. We continue. Our vigil in the next deep silence, the deep quiet of the chamber, was still a solid thing, held fast within the thick protective shell of the ancient stuccoed walls. Only the fading warmth of the banked charcoal embers offered proof that life had stirred. Here, during the velvet watches of the night, a scent of cooling ash and residual cedar smoke lingered low beneath the high ceiling beams. The Athenian oikos, the private home, rested heavy and still in the pause between the profound dark and the assertive light. The tiny window's small slits, cut through the limestone, offered no grand view, only a muted suggestion of the pearl gray world outside. Light does not enter this intimate space. It is slowly inhaled, drawn in by the cool stone surfaces, one gentle photon at a time. This is the hour when the profound weight of routine begins to settle once more upon the household day. Profound, predictable comfort etched into the slow calendar of the years. The first stirrings come not from the master, but from the small room tucked away in the shadows of the Ginakanatish. Segregated quarters where the women and the enslaved members of the family prepare to meet the demands of the Daya. Soft, dragging sound, a low whisper of movement, too gentle to be sharp, yet persistent enough to break the illusion of perfect silence. Perhaps it is the youngest woman tasked with trimming the wicks of the small oil lamps, their flame cups heavy with olive oil, patiently waiting for the nudge of a small bronze tool. She moves without haste, knowing that the slow speed of the morning sets the tone for the slow speed of the life. The thick, smoky residue of the previous evening must be carefully scraped away, preserving the quality of the coming light. The glow that emerges is a honeyed amber, a temporary illumination before the glorious insistence of Helios asserts itself above the Nixa. Soft metallic sound now as the water is poured from a wide-mouthed storage vessel, a sound immediately absorbed by the dry air. Water is the great precursor, the absolute necessity before any other domestic task can properly begin. The cleansing of hands, the rinsing of the simple meal preparation vessels. The tempering of the day's first dough is cool water drawn earlier from the public fountain, perhaps the Anacruos or Nine Spouts, where the women gather in a social murmur as the sun reaches its zenith. Now that water is brought forth in small polished bronze bowls, reflecting the delicate amber light above. The routine dictates that the master's simple cot must be cleared, and the heavy woolen blanket folded with absolute precision. Order must be imposed upon the sleeping space, reflecting the citizen's need for order within his mind and within the polis itself. The straw ticking underneath the mattress rustles like dry autumn leaves. A temporary small sound quickly hushed. The main chamber, known as the Andron, slowly emerges from the shadows, ready to receive the first rays of direct morning light that managed to penetrate the narrow space. It is here, later in the evening, where the master will host his few guests. The soft cushions, already stacked neatly in the corner of their covers of deep-dyed madder root, waiting to be unfurled. But that is the concern of the coming night. Now we deal only with the humble tasks of the rising sun. The most important ritual of the Athenian morning begins now near the small earthen oven. The Hestia is the preparation of maza, the simple barley cake, the staple, the unshakable foundation of the daily meal course. Barley flour, ground slowly between heavy millstones. The day before is brought out in a large wooden measure, is mixed simply with water, sometimes a little olive oil, or perhaps a trace of wild sesame seed if the household is fortunate. The motions of the mixing are deeply rhythmic, a slow circular folding of the sticky gray mass under the careful hands of the senior enslaved woman. Her concentration is absolute, her focus inward, a meditative state brought forth by the repeating necessity of the same motion day after day, decade after decade. Knows the precise feel of the dough when it is ready, when the moisture has been perfectly distributed throughout the grain. This is not the frivolous white bread of luxury. This is the sustained fuel for the citizen. The soldier, the builder, is the dense, heavy bread that requires slow, steady chewing releasing its energy over hours of hard work, whether in the fields or debating. In the assembly, the first cakes are flattened into thin rounds, placed carefully onto heated stones near the residual warmth of the fire pit. The smell begins to change, now a deepening warmth rising off the stone, a dry, comforting aroma that signifies the true commencement of the Athenian day, not the rush of the trader, not the clamor of the port, but the quiet, simple act of eating this humble. Grain outside the chamber, the small enclosed courtyard begins to lighten considerably. The shadows retreat, further clinging only to the base of the whitewashed walls where the limestone is perpetually cool. The stone floor of the courtyard requires sweeping a slow, gentle motion with a broad broom made of stiff, tightly bound reeds. It is a dry sweeping, raising only the finest dust motes that catch the rising light, turning them briefly into clouds of tiny gold. Dust settles quickly, a reminder of the proximity of the earth, of the simple, unpaved nature of the world, beyond the narrow threshold. Athenian home, even for those of moderate wealth, is not a place of soft furnishings or excessive adornment. Its beauty lies in its simplicity, its practicality, its deep dedication to surviving the intense summer heat and the sharp winter rains. The very design of the house is oriented inward, focused on that central courtyard, the repository of light and privacy. Is a world turned away from the noise and the endless negotiations of the sprawling city streets. Here within the oikos, the rules are ancient and immutable, centered around the gods of the hearth and the practical needs of survival. The master of the house. The Kyrios is now beginning to stir in his sleeping quarters. He does not rush his awakening, is deliberate, slow, unhurried. Clothes for the day are already laid out for him near his low wooden chair, simple tunic of undyed linen carefully folded, waiting for his attention. He does not require complicated fastening or elaborate preparation, just the slipping on of the cool fabric over his skin. It is a relief from the warmth of the heavy sleeping mantle that protected him during the deepest of the night. His sandals, too, are waiting, simple leather thongs already softened by the moisture of previous wear. He will strap them onto his feet with a familiar tug, a sound that travels only a short distance in the quiet house. First act of the day for the Kyrios must be the formal washing, not a full bath, which is often reserved for the public bathing houses later in the day, but a formal ritual cleansing of the face and hands using the cool water provided by the industrious hands of his household staff. He steps into the courtyard, the light now stronger, but still gentle, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The air is still clear before the exhalations of the thousands of cooking fires, and the movement of the busy streets begin to pollute the deep blue Athenian sky. A small prayer is offered. Now a quick, sincere gesture toward the small shrine dedicated to Zeus Kyrios, the god who guards the household stores and property. Silent request for continued prosperity and peace within these familiar walls. The low sound of the grain grinding begins a hypnotic rhythmic, scraping the sound of persistent labor perhaps. More flour is being prepared for later in the day, or maybe it is for the thickening of a simple stew that will simmer slowly over the course of the long hours. Pervasive, the background music of the ancient city, long before the clamor of the market reaches the private world of the homes. The low stone sill of the doorway waits patiently now for the master's passing, the brief moment when the citizen moves from the intimate quiet order of his private existence into the loud demanding public life of the Athenian day. Pauses briefly at the threshold, absorbing the last moments of domestic quiet before he steps into the lane. His breakfast is ready. Now the humble barley cake freshly warmed, and perhaps a few olives preserved in brine simple, sustaining sustenance eaten quickly standing, or perhaps seated on a low stool. No. Elaborate table, no long drawn out meal, just the necessity of fuel for the mind and the body, the slow rhythm of chewing the dense bread, the salty bite of the olive, the final cool draught of water. The door, made of heavy cured timber and bound with bronze fittings, is now reached its pivot creak, slightly a low protesting sound against the stone frame as it is pulled slowly inward. The world outside is already brighter than the interior of the house. The narrow dirt lane, the steno, waits just beyond the threshold, still cloaked in deep shadow because of the height of the neighboring walls. The ordinary Athenian day is beginning its slow, persistent march forward. Routine repeated not just for this one morning, but for countless mornings stretching back into the deep past. Citizen steps across the threshold, leaving the quiet protection of his oikos, and moves toward the sounds of the distant Agora. The heavy wooden door swings shut behind him with a low, reassuring thud, sealing the household and its quiet routines once more into the cool privacy. The scent of warm bread lingers in the courtyard. A promise of return, a center of gravity holding the master's thought as he begins his slow walk into the rising light. Dust the path was soft now beneath the leather soles of the sandals. Whisper of morning moisture had lifted, leaving only the baked warmth of the attic soil. The olive grove retreated slowly, its silver leaves shivering only when the slightest breeze dared to stir the heavy air. We drift further from the quiet rooms of the home, moving toward the hum that rise from the heart of the city below. Low, continuous sound is not loud, it is merely the sound of thousands of breaths exhaling the morning heat. This movement is not hurried Athenian. Life unfolds with a measured digniture of pace dictated by the sun's slow climb and the weight of tradition. The morning sun itself is still tender and amber fluid spilling over the high slopes of the Nixit. Catches the pale ochre stone of the public buildings itching the sharp lines of the colonnades against the deepening blue. The stone blocks are ancient teach, one absorbing the slow history of countless days, the coolness within their deep choruses. A secret guarded against the coming zenith of the heat. You can feel the faint reverberation off the past centuries held within the mortar. Air carries the scent of freshly crushed herbs, thyme, and oregano. Brought in from the mountain slopes, mingled with that is the sharp, salty tang of the Saronic Gulf, a promise of fish, and the distant rhythm of ships. The Agora awaits, but it is not a place of sudden rush. It is a basin where the streams of daily life collect and pool. We walk past the quiet boundaries of the potter's quarter, where the faint sound of the spinning wheel makes a low, insistent drone. The clay dust is fine-coating the walls, and the hands of the craftsmen a velvet layer of earth. The finished amphorae stand in roastier surfaces, still rough before the final fire. They wait patiently for the heat that will transform their pliable forms into vessels capable of holding the rich harvest of the land, the golden olive oil, deep ruby wine. Each pot carries the memory of the river clay. The water used to soften and has long evaporated, but the coolness of that moisture persists in the imagination. The sounds are all muted. The distant clanging of a smith working bronze ice, swallowed almost instantly by the distance. Only the softest percussion of human activity reaches a steady, rhythmic pulse of labor undertaken. Slowly, we observe the deep shade cast by the overhanging roof tillies, a welcome relief that moves with impossible slowness. The light source shifts. These moments are built of stillness off observation without urgency. The Athenian day does not demand haste, it demands contemplation of the necessary things. A farmer guides his heavily laden donkey, animals' hooves stirring the pale dust once more. Basket slung over its back is woven tightly, holding the heavy clusters of grapes of the sturdy heads of cabbage. The farmer himself walks with the weight of the land upon his shoulders, his tunic simple and rough-woven wool. His face is cloaked in the shadow of his wide-brimmed straw hat, a necessary shield against the brilliance of the Greek sky. Exchanges a low quiet, a syllable swallowed by the air. This slow procession is the heart of the morning movement of goods into the center. Steady circulation of sustenance. We step onto the first paving stones of the central square. The stones here are polished smooth not by intention, but by the attrition of generations of feet. The marble surface reflects the light back upward, creating a gentle halo around the feet. Here, the density of human movement begins to increase a bit. Still, it remains. Measure it a stately dance of commerce and conversation. Vendors are setting out their goods. The scent of dried figs and raisins is rich and sweet. Heavy perfume mingling with the sharper scent of vinegar and stored grains, baskets of small, circular loaves of breadly waiting their crusts, still crisp from the oven. The loaves represent the core of Athenian existence as daily gift of Demeter, respected and never wasted. We see the water sellers steer heavy clay pitchers balanced skillfully. The water within is cool and slightly mineral, having been hauled from the distant springs. Thin film of moisture often clings to the outside of the clay, evaporating instantly in the dry. Air creating a miniature chill around the vessel, the low murmur of trade. Begins it the frantic shouting of a modern market, but a negotiated whispering. Value of a thing is discussed quiet, like process itself is of the civic ritual. The weight of the silver obol is tested in the palm, metallic coolness contrasting. With the warm skin, the exchange is often accompanied by gesture as a slight note of measured pause time stretches. Hirite is an elastic concept measured not by clocks, but by the slow drain of shadow across the square, paused by the base of a bronze statuette. Surface darkened and warmed by the sun. The metal holds the memory of the sculptor's hand, moment of creation frozen permanently. Watches the daily spectacle silent and eternal. The heat begins to press down, now a tangible weight settling onto. The broad shoulders of the city seeking refuge move towards the covered stoas, long sheltered walkways lined with columns. Interior of the stoa is hushed air, still and cool. The columns rise, upfluted and strong. Their presence suggests permanence. An order here beneath the roof, philosophers and citizens gather not for hurried exchange but for deliberation. Their voices are low, pitched sound, rebounding gently off the marble floor. Conversations drift on subjects vast and small outcome. Of the assembled price of oil, nature of the good life. The shadows here are profound, deep, comforting gray. We watch the tiny specks of dust suspended in the light beams that pierce the open sides of the structure. These microscopic worlds drift, slowly held captive in the slow-moving air currents. The feeling is one of being cloaked, removed slightly from the intensity of the day. The linen of the tunic feels slightly damp against the skin, a fine layer of sweat gathered from the heat outside. But within this cool enclosure, its body finds its rest, a moment of profound quietude. We notice the details etched into the stone walls. Graffiti marks left by idle hands, millennia ago, namia simple, drawing a brief declaration of love or boredom. These tiny inscriptions connect us immediate teleto, the human thread that stretched back through the centuries. The concerns were the same of longing for acknowledgement, simple desire to mark one's passage through the time. The sun continues its slow climb. Zenith is approaching. The shadows are now shrinking back to the very base of the columns, offering minimal retreat. The rhythm of the water clock dictates the official timing of the day. It's gentle drip heard faintly from the nearby administrative building. It is a sound of relentless patience marking the passing of the hours dedicated to public service. The citizens who are not involved in the commerce of the Agora may now be moving toward the bathing establishments. The ritual of cleansing is a slow, deliberate act. The body is scraped gently with the striggle, removing the accumulated dust and oil, a careful process requiring concentration. The warmed water feels soothing, releasing the tension gathered. From the early morning's labor, the communal baths are social placesna, hurried necessities. Here too, the conversation is slow and spooling in the warm steam and the quiet splash of water. Walls are often decorated, simply painted scenes of heroes or athletes' figures frozen in moments of impossible strength. This midday pause is secreta. Break before the afternoon's intensitized business of the assembly or the return to the workshops. The light outside the stoa has achieved a blinding intensity. Perfect white glare that makes the shapes of the distant hills dissolve into haze is a time for the lazy contemplation of Shapesti. Perfect geometry of the Doric columns, smooth line of the horizon. The heat makes the movements of men slower, more deliberate, and for a certain meditative quality on the simplest task. A slave draws water from a public fountain, heavy bronze spout angled slightly downward. Sound of the water hitting the stone basin is sharp and clear, a refreshing counterpoint. To the drone of the insects in the nearby grasses, he carries the water in a tall, narrow clay pitcher, its neck stoppered with a twist of cloth. Attention given to this simple task is absolute, a steady pace of the footsteps across the rough ground. Are reminded that life here is built upon repetition, the endless cycle of drawing water, grinding, grain weaving cloth. These are the unseen threads that hold the structure of the city together, quiet, sustaining work. The air inside the stoa shifts. Subtly carrying the dry scent of sun-heated marble is the smell of permanency of enduring strength. Watch a child chase a lizard across the sun-drenched stones, creature moving with impossible speed. The brief flash of movement breaks the pervasive. Stillness bare the scene settles back into its hypnotic calm. Child laughs softly, a sound quickly muffled by the vast space of the open air. Turn our attention to the clay roof tiles high above. They are laid overlapping a patchwork of reddish brown, each tile bearing the impression of the potter's finger marks. They shield us effectively a roof that has borne the weight of winter storms and the constant pressure of the summer. Sun for decades, the surface of the wood beams supporting Themis. Dark and seasoned nth grain deeply etched by time. The shadow lines within the stoa begin to lengthen very slowly. Minute hand of the sun turning the vast dial of the earth. The deepest heat of the day has passed its peak, subtle feeling of easing. Tension enters the air. The sounds of the Agora outside begin to change pitch. The serious business of the morning is concluded. The light-hearted chatter of late afternoon negotiation takes hold. The sellers of prepared food, small snacks are roasted. Chickpeas and sweet cakes begin to appear there. Calls are rhythmic and melodic off the ingrained soundtrack of the Athenian day. The air smells briefly of smoke from a small charcoal brazieras to heat the simple, savory dishes we settle against a cool stone bench. The stone is rough against the linen, a grounding sensation. The stillness is complete now, a profound immersion in the slow pulse of the ancient city. The weight of time is lifted dropless, only by the immediate sensation of the warm stone. Soft light, the continuous low sound of shared existence, the world outside the shade seems distant, a shimmering mirage held captive by the unrelenting sun. The Athenian hour drifts, unhurried wine conquer, observe the dust motes dancing a final private performance aboard. The shadows inevitably grow longer still. The velvet night arrives. The parchment was britly a thin veil against the centuries. Surface bore the weight of silence seached with symbols that only whispered secrets into the cooling. Air the scent of dust and dried fig wood lingered, a faint perfume of forgotten scholars. You trace the outline of the archaic scripta, language built of stars and shadows. The moon through the high window cast a fractured sheen upon the reading desk end. Amber island in a sea of velvet gloom. The script spoke not of treasure of kingdoms conquered it, detailed the geometry of stillness. Exact coordinates of a place found online when the heart slows its steady rhythm. It named the whisperer's citadella. Name resonant with deep quietude cloaked, not by mountains, but by the absence of attention. It specified the hour of unveiling moment when the earth breathes out a long, slow exhalation. Felt only at the nadir of the night, you slowly rolled the fragile. Document sounds softer than the movement of a moth's wing. The chamber held its breath around you, a vault of hushed anticipation. The long journey now extended itself beyond the limits of simple geography. It became a drift across the plains of knowing, a slow passage into the landscape of myth. The exit from the archive was a return to the great slow breath of the world. Outside, the desert waited vast and indifferent, a sleeping giant under the of the sky. The sand was cold, no holding the memory of the searing day. Like a promise made in fever, your steps were muffled, deliberatia, soft percussion. Against the immense quiet, every breath you took was a measurement off the distance left to travel. Stars above were innumerable in sharp each pinprick of light, an ancient historian spooling across the void. You felt the gravitational pull of the unknown location, a profound magnetism drawing the body forward with a gentle, unhurried force. The wind came, then a harsh, aggressive gust, but a long sustained sigh sound that smoothed the edges of religion, softened the distinction between dreaming and wakefulness, carried the scent of dry time and distant salt, a mixture that spoke of immense, slow erosion of time worn down into fine powder hours past. Like the slow pouring of thick honey, the celestial sphere pivoted overheat, revealing constellations named by civilization well. Left only fragments of smooth ancient stone. The body moved in a rhythm inherited from the desert, a steady hypnotic swaya. Motion of deep acceptance. You were becoming of the drift of centuries, the slow migration of light. Thought of urgency dissolved, living only the purity of the forward motion. The destination was not a specific building, the scroll had. Warned against fixed perception, it was a quality of the landscape, confluence of geological quiet, where the land folds inward to listen. Ground began to change subtly. The sand surrendered to smooth cobblestone, to larger worn stones, each one cool and weighty beneath your feet. The colors of the night deepened into shades of indigo and bruised purple. Air grew heavy with a mineral-scented coolness rising from the deep earth. The shadows became longer, less defined, blending into a continuous curtain-off. Deep, tranquil darkness, you knew without seeing that you were approaching the Whisperer's citadel. It was a feeling of profound stillness radiating from a source unseen. Sense that the very atmosphere had ceased at its normal agitation. The movement slowed. To an almost imperceptible glide, you stopped beside a monolith, a single pillar of dark igneous. Rock-worn smooth by the incessant soft touch of the desert air, it stood without defiance, a sentry guarding the silent truth beyond the monolith, the landscape. Opened it into a wide bowl formation, a natural amphitheater, where sound could not escape but was drawn inward, absorbed in. Turned into silence itself, the rock faces were sheer and dark-etched with lines that resembled the veins on an old leaf, or the faint wrinkles on a sleeping face. This was the entranced not through a doorway of carved cedar, but through the surrender to the stillness. The citadel was not built, it was found a hollow carved by the long, slow arc of time. You stood at the threshold, the air, profoundly cold yet somehow welcoming, a final curtain of shadow hung before you, impenetrable yet fragile. You reached out slowly, a gesture of profound respect for the quiet. The blackness did not resist it, parted or simply allowed passage to a space. Of immense hushed volume, the ground inside was uneven, cool, a floor of fine compacted silt. The walls rose steeply, curving inward to meet a high dark ceiling. There was no architecture of intent, here only the vast cathedral of the earth itself. The darkness was not absolute, a faint light resided at the far end of the caverna. Delicate, persistent glimmer, it was not fire or lamplight. It possessed an ethereal quality, a soft glowing aura, like distant amber trapped in ice. It pulsated almost imperceptibly, a slow, measured heartbeat of light. The air within the cavern felt older, thicker than the world outside. Silence pressed against the ears, a physical pressure demanding a deep surrender of all external noise. You began a slow, deliberate walk towards the source of that faint light. Each step was measured and cared, respectful. Intruder in this ancient sanctum. The sound of your own breathing seemed loud, intrusive, a temporary disturbance in the deep sleep of the earth. As you approached the light, it revealed a structure, a low dome of carved stone set deep into the floor of the cavern. It was featureless, smooth, made of the same dark stone as the monolith outside it. Bore no inscriptions, no marks of ownership. It was merely there and enclosed, perfect sphere of silent knowledge. At the apex of the dome of the amber light resided. It was emanating not from a flame, but from a pool of liquida, perfectly circular depression filled with a viscous substance that glowed softly with its own internal warmth. You knelt slowly beside the pool. The warmth radiated outwards, gently, a soothing invitation. The glow intensified slightly with your presence, as if recognizing a long-awaited visitor. You leaned closer still. Liquid held the light captive, a small universe of slow, swirling luminescence. Then, within the depths of the glowing pool, a single image began to form, a slow, emerging visualization. It was not a map or a symbol. It was the suggestion of movement, a rhythmic, flowing pattern like water over polished ancient stone. And then the pattern resolved itself into the faint impression of a face, ethereal, indistinct yet undeniably present. It was watching you not with judgment or fear, but with a gaze of infinite profound patience. The face began to dissolve, then reappear, a flicker within the amber heart, and a sound, Aravednet, from the dome, not from the air, but from somewhere deep inside the stone itself. Single low-frequency notia, sustained, resonant hum too. Low to be heard by the outer ear, yet felt distinctly within the chest. It was the sound of the earth, breathing the slow pulse of geologic time. And within that sound, face dissolved, completely leaving only the slow amber glow which began to flicker. One last team, a sudden profound instability bore, plunging the cavern into utter velvet darkness, leaving the sustained low hum of the deep stone drifting, now completely alone in the absolute absence of life. The silence of the Asti had settled deeper. Hushed velvet blanket woven from darkness and the stillness of marble. The cyclopean shadows of the Parthenon remained etched against the bruised indigo of the western sky. Profound stillness, held momentarily captive, a breath of cool air slipped through the narrow window slits of the humble stone house, carrying the faint scent of olive oil lamps, extinguished hours before in, and the sharper promise of distant morning dew, yet unseen. The sleeping chamber remained cloaked in profound quietude. Straw pallets yielded slightly beneath the weight of deep unconscious rest. This was the final deep descent before the sun's chariot began its slow, metallic ascent over the slopes of High Metusa Mountain, whose honey was famous, whose stone was reserved for the gods. The hour was Proges, the time before dawn, when the stars still held dominion, though their light had grown thin and watery. The darkness was not absolute, but a deep gray opacity, a quality of shadow that absorbed all sound, all movement. All haste beneath the main sleeping area in the lower courtyard level. Household servants began their slow metered rising. No. Sharp clangor disturbed the established household, quietly the soft scrape of leather sandals on compacted earthen flora. Sound that whispered against the cool ancient stone. A young woman named Lyra, perhaps 12 years of age, lifted the heavy clay amphora, its surface cool and damp from the night's chill. It represented the perpetual need, the constant necessity of water. She moved toward the stone well head in the inner peristyle. The rope groaned, a dry, low sound, absorbed quickly by the thick stone walsa. Ritual sound of the Athenian dawn, centuries old water surged up from the deep cisterna, sound of liquid silver spilling. Into the still darkness, this water tasted of the bedrock, an ancient rain, cold and pure, a blessing from the deep earth. It was the prerequisite for all morning rites, from the ceremonial washing of hands to the soaking of the barley kernels. The small fire in the andron, the men's central gathering room, was carefully stoked. A pile of embers protected overnight beneath ash was brought back to life. The light bloomed slow and amber, casting vast dancing silhouettes of figures moving silently and efficiently. Sweet dry smoke of olive wood curled upward, finding its way out through the open central roof, the opine filling the inner courtyard with a gentle earthy perfume. The Kyrios, the master of this small realm, stirred slowly on his wood incline. His sleep had been the deep, steady repose afforded by physical labor and settled conscience. He rose with a methodical quietude, habitual movements practiced over 50 seasons. The first act was always the lustration, a careful pouring of the cool well water over his hands and face, using a small, shallow basin called a luterian. Water felt bracing against his skin, sharp and awakening. His body was anointed lightly with simple scented oil of pale sheen against his tanned forearm, not for luxury, but for protection against the heat and dust of the impending day. He dressed in the simple morning chitana, single piece of finely woven linen draped and pinned at the shoulder. It fell in clean vertical folds. It was the uniform of the free man preparing for civic engagement. No unnecessary complexity marred the severe elegance of his preparation. And the Gamma-Canibus, the women's quarters, located separately in the rear of the house. The preparation was quieter, more involved, more centered on the domestic. Loom, the mistress of the house, Phryne, oversaw the grinding of the grain. The heavy stone pestle thumped softly against the mortar, rhythmic, hypnotic sound of sustained effort. The grain was dehusked and crushed at basis of the morning meal and the midday sustenance. The meal was prepared quickly, a thick, nourishing barley porridge called mesosemi times, whitened with honey gathered from a medicine, a scattering of dried figs saved from the previous autumn's yield. It was eaten standing or sitting. Briefly upon a low wooden stool, the sound of teeth crushing grain was the loudest noise permitted at this sacred early hour, sound of life, simple and sustaining. He drank a thin, weak wine, mixed heavily with the fresh, cool water sustaining the body. For the long morning ahead, spent debating and trading at the Agora, household moved on a precise schedule dictated by light and hunger and economy of motion perfected over generations. As Kyrios finished his modest portion, faint light outside was changing from indigo to a pale yellow-gray. The air outside his courtyard now carried new auditory textures. The lowing of oxen being driven toward the ceramic kilns outside the city walls, deep echoing bellow. Distant muffled cries of street. Vendors setting up stalls near the Dipolon gate. The shrill insistent braying of a donkey laden with wineskins. The city was slowly shaking off its velvet shroud reclaiming. Its energy, its demanding noise, its constant commerce, the Kyrios tightened. The belt around his chitin preparing to step across the threshold, the secluded privacy of his Oikacinto, the demanding light of the polis. He took his staff, a simple, sturdy olive wood rancher, necessary companion for the uneven, winding streets in. Stepped out into the narrow lane, the stenopos, houses pressed close on either side walls, made of sun-baked brick, covered in cheap whitewash semidimes. Chipping revealing the raw clay beneath the lanes were still damp from the night's coolinga. Faint smell of wood smoke and refuse and strong vinegar lingered low to the ground. He moved with the steady pace of one accustomed to distances. Leather sandals slapping rhythmically against the Derpatha sound, replicated across hundreds of similar streets now awakening. He passed the house of his neighbor, a wealthy triarch named Demetrius. Ostentatious bronze knocker was already gleaming in the weak first sunlight. Demetrius was already ahead, likely aiming for the Nix Hilto secure. A good listening spot for the morning's assembly. Goal was the Agora at the heart of the city, the nervous center of Athenian life. The way was uphill slightly, then leveling out near the temple of Hephaestus, where the craftsmen were already beginning their noisy work. The sound of hammers striking bronze was the first truly industrial noise of the Dia, ringing metallic chorus rising above the domestic quietude. Past the fountain house, where a crowd of women and their servants were already gathering their water supply there, chatter a high, soft murmur of gossip and necessity. The large communal basins overflowed slightly. Cold runoff tracing wet paths down the cobbled ground, he nodded to a farmer leading a goat toward the market stalsa. Man whose life was wholly centered on this cycle of the seasons far, removed from the sophistries of the assembly. The air was growing warmer, the light more insistent. The shadows were shrinking, gathering themselves close to the bases of the stone monuments. Kyrios adjusted the folds of his cloak, ensuring his demeanor was suitable for public address, the shift from the quiet privacy of the household. Till the clamor of the civic space was complete, he entered the vast open rectangle of the Agora field. Of dust and dreams and profound philosophical weight, the place was already teeming. Early traders were laying out their wares beneath temporary linen awnings. Scent of fresh bread from the bakeries mingled with the sharp salt air and the pungent smell of livestock brought in from the countryside. He saw the vendors of garlic and onions seated next to the merchants selling fine painted pottery, the geometric patterns etched forever onto the clay surface. The official buildings around the edge of the square stood severe and imposing tholos, the Bouleuteria and the Stoa Potilio, ancient stone monuments to the machinery of democracy, a system demanding constant attendance, vigilance, and voice. He sought out the colonnade or the grain. Traders habitually gathered their prices, determining the fate of thousands of households. The low rumble of conversation was immensia, collective hum of argument. The Athenian day had truly begun a complex choreography of the mundane, and the magnificent under the growing gold light of the Hellenic sun. Kyrios settled his gaze on the familiar crowd, ready to listen, ready to debate, ready to live the slow, arduous civic rhythm of the ordinary free man in the extraordinary polis of Athens. The weight of the day settled softly upon his shoulders, a mantle of simple duty, a continuation of the ordinary life that formed the bedrock of this great ancient world. His place was here now among the slow, purposeful movements of the market where philosophy met the price of barley and where the dust of the ground settled upon the velvet surface of history. Warmth of the afternoon sun still lingers on the eastern wall, soft diffused light filtering through the narrow window slits, not a blazing heat, but a drowsy languor settling over the household. The air inside the main room remains cool, saved by the thickness of the stone. This ancient stone remembers the heat of 1,000 summers. It carries the coolness of the deep earth itself, the Floor beneath your barefoot is gritty and smooth, worn down by the passage of countless days and the simple necessities of life. A slight hollow depression is etched into the slate. Near the hearth, a mark left by decades of sweeping the embers away. Quiet permanence rests in these unassuming details. The scent of drying time hangs faintly near the roof beams, mixed with the older smell of smoke and the subtle tang of stored grains. Everything is hushed now. The children are asleep in their inner chambers, lying, still wrapped in light woolen shawls against the slight chill of the shade. The sounds of the city are muffled, distant echoes, the rumble of a cartwheel on the cobbled street far away, the high thin cry of a street vendor selling fresh figs, perhaps, but here, within the protective walls of the oikos, there is only stillness. A woman sits near the edge of the light, her hands resting lightly in her lap. They are hands made strong by the turning of the spindle, by the grinding of wheat in the heavy stone mortar hands that know the velvet smoothness of new-spun wool. She watches the slow creeping shadow of the doorway, a shadow that grows longer, more defined as the sun declines. The amber light catches the threads of her simple white chiton, illuminating the fine woven texture of the linen, a product of patient labor and dedication. The light is moving toward the large chest in the corner, chest carved from dark cedar. Wood heavy and unmoving, it holds the family's most valued possessions. A few pieces of silver jewelry, a small carved idol of Hestia. The thick folded winter cloaks, the wood is deep dark, absorbing the ambient light. If you lean close, you might detect the faint dry scent of the cedar, scent meant to repel the tiny invisible creatures that consume time. This is the rhythm of protection and provision, the quiet guardianship of the things that endure. The air itself feels weighted heavy with the slow accumulation of time. You feel the centuries pressing gently upon the roof tiles. The pressure of Athenian routine, unbroken season. The lack of urgency is profound, almost hypnotic. There's only the slow, inevitable glide toward evening above. The low table stands a small oil lamp ready for the transition. It is filled with pure olive oil, a pale yellowish liquid. Wick trimmed short, awaiting the gentle strike of the flint, but not yet. The last generous measure of daylight must first be consumed. Look closely at the surface of the clay pitcher sitting on the table. Its surface is slightly damp from the cool water it holds. Tiny imperfections reveal the hurried thumbprint of the pottery. Small moment of human haste forever captured. In the fired earth, it is cloaked in the simplicity of its function. The stillness deepens. The buzzing fly that was investigating the rim of the pitcher has flown away, leaving the silence undisturbed. This silence is not empty, it is filled with the slow pulse of a living, breathing structure. You become aware of the cooling sensation on your skin as the ambient temperature of the room begins its gradual descent. The shadow now touches the entire length of the cedar chest, enveloping it in a gentle, soft gray. The amber moment is almost over. It is the time of quiet preparation, a time when tasks are finished without rushing, when the remaining grains are swept neatly into the earthenware jars, when the heavy millstones are wiped clean of their dust. Imagine the subtle sound of the mortar and pestle, not the loud, heavy, crushing sound of morning, but a gentle rubbing, a slow grinding of dried herbs for the evening meal. The pestle is polished smooth by years of friction. It fits perfectly into the bowl of the mortara, marriage of labor and material. The woman rises slowly without a word. Her movement is fluid, unhurried. She walks across the ancient stone floor to the doorway. She pauses there, framed by the diminishing light the world outside is now taking on the softer hues of twilight. The harsh outlines of the Acropolis visible above the neighboring roofs are beginning to blur, to soften into a monumental silhouette. The marble gleams with a last farewell flash of light. It is etched against the deepening sky. She is simply observing the world she inhabits, the slow exhalation of the Athenian afternoon, the distant sound of men returning from the Agora. Their voices, low, indistinct murmurs carried on the still air. She reaches out and touches the rough wooden doorpost. It is pitted and grayed a dull silver where the wood is exposed. This tactile connection reinforces the reality of the structure, the unwavering stability of the home, a small universe organized against the chaos of the outside world. Her attention shifts to the simple courtyard, where a few dusty vines climb the low trellis. They offer sparse shade and the promise of small, hard grapes. The earth here is dry, cracked, thirsty. Yet, the olive tree planted centrally seems indifferent to its silvery dream. Leaves shimmer slightly in the cooling breeze. The breeze is a soft whisper, a hushed breath. It carries the clean scent of dust stirred up from the street, and the faintest whiff of burning charcoal from a distant kitchen fire, a promise of food, a reminder. Of shared sustenance, she steps back inside the deep shade of the room. The light has become a deep honey tone a moment before true darkness descends. She moves toward the place where the vertical loom stands, tall, silent, waiting, the warp threads hang. Taut and disciplined, a field of pure white wool awaiting the shuttle's gentle dance. The loom itself is a heavy wooden machine, solidly built, designed to withstand the tension of creation. It is an anchor in the room, a testament not of spirit, but of industry. The threads feel dry, cool, slightly rough. Each strand represents hours of preparation, of combing and spinning. Very essence of Athenian domesticity. The work is never truly finished. The maintenance of the household is an eternal cycle. Renewal, she touches the weights, hanging at the bottom of the warp-rounded stones, salvaged from the nearby coastline each. Weight is unique shape by the ceaseless action of the sea. They are heavy, silent, necessary partners in the creation of cloth. These stones are ancient stone, truly ancient, carrying the memory of the waves. The density of the wool feels comforting. Profound physical substance made from the raw earth. It offers protection, warmth, and modesty. This quiet labor forms the foundation of her world, ruled by the measured precision of the hand. A tiny moth flits aimlessly near the ceiling, drawn perhaps to the imagined light. Dances briefly in the gloom before settling on a high, dark beam. Its movement is ephemeral, a fleeting interruption of the stillness. She walks past the rows of small plain bowls, used for holding spices or measuring liquids. They are simple, unpainted fired clay. Their form is perfect utility. They embody the principle of moderation. Think of the simple ingredients contained within these small vessels: dried oregano, mint, sea salt, coarse ground. Flavors of this plain diet are intensely focused, reflecting the bright sun and the hard, dry land. Feeling of enclosure is strong now. The walls seem to draw inward. Protective, insulating the worries of the Agora, the politics, the wars. They fade outside this thick threshold. This space is reserved for the elemental truths of survival and comfort. The cool air now has an insistent quality. It presses against the thin linen of her garment. It signals the final withdrawal of the sun's dominion. Transition is complete. She reaches for the bronze oil. Its surface is tarnished green with age and handling. The metal is cold to the touch. She strikes the flint gently. The spark catching the ready wick, a tiny flare of orange light springs forth. The light is immediately warm, intimate. It throws deep, wavering shadows across the walls, making the familiar lines of the room appear dramatic, strange. The objects that were cloaked in twilight are now defined by the firelight. The amber glow fills the small space. Immediately surrounding the lampet is a pool of fragile, comforting illumination. The edges of the room remain dark, deeply shadowed, a vast quiet periphery waiting. Patiently, she adds a slow, steady stream of oil to the small reservoir. The liquid is precious, carefully measured. It represents hours of pressing and harvesting the olive fruit. The slow, smooth movement of the oil is mesmerizing. The quiet hiss of the flame consuming the oil is the loudest sound. Now it is the sound of necessary consumption. The small, persistent flame is a core of light in the vast. Athenian night dictates the boundaries of activity. The evening meal will be simple, prepared and eaten within this small circle. Barley cakes dipped in oil, a few olives, some dried cheese. The food is solid, fundamental fuel. A ritual of renewal performed every single day. The weight of the house settles further. The old beams groan slightly overhead. Not a sound of weakness, but of mass adjusting to the cooling temperature. The stone walls seem to breathe a slow, steady breath. Imagine the texture of the barley cake, rough, slightly sour, wholesome its surface, uneven, cooked over the hot charcoal. The oil coating it is rich, dense, flavorful. This is not a meal of speed or excitement. It is a slow, patient consumption of necessity. Energy required to endure tomorrow's labor. The conversation, if any, will be low and slow. The quiet concerns of the household. Shared simply, the shadows dance high above. The roof beams disappear into the blackness. The ceiling is now in endless velvet darkness. Up by the stout wooden posts that support the structure, the silence becomes immersive. The distant sounds of the city are completely gone, swallowed by the night, and the thick stone walls. Only the gentle crackle of the lamp wick remains. The sensation is one of being deeply enclosed, protected, wrapped in the heavy silence of the night, and a long history of the dwelling. This ancient stone has known the sleep of countless generations. It holds the echoes of their dreams, their fears, their quiet routines, feel the profound lack of need for speech. The understanding passed without words, the simple presence of others. In the flickering amber light, a shared state of quiet existence. The flame itself is a perfect cone of light. It draws the eye inward, focusing the attention. The shadow cast by the woman is immense. Exaggerated on the opposite wall, a ghostly, elongated figure performing the simple acts of life. She takes a small cup of wine cut heavily with water. It is a tradition, a small indulgence. The flavor is earthy dark, reflecting the soil, a quiet moment of rest before the final preparations for sleep. The weight of the day is lifting, slowly drifting away on the currents of the cooling air. The body relaxes, the muscles loosen from the tension of labor. The only duty left is rest, to allow the body to recover its strength, its quiet resolve. The loom stands sentinel in the darkness, the unfinished cloth waiting patiently for the dawn. It is a symbol of the work that continues, a link between yesterday and the slow creeping light of tomorrow. We linger in this hushed moment. The scent of the burning oil is warm and slightly acrid, a clean smell of necessary light. The world outside is a distant rumor, a whisper. The sleep is drawing nearer, now closer. Then the dark corners of the room closer than the sound of your own quiet breathing. The cool air moves through the house like a slow river, seeking the lowest points, the deepest shadows. You are suspended within this ancient atmosphere, held by the permanence of the stone and the rhythm of the life contained. Within, everything is slow to a crawl. The passage of time is measured only by the dripping of the oil, the gradual consumption of the wick, the subtle tilt of the lamp's light. Imagine resting your cheek against the rough texture of the wool cloak. Fibers soft. Despite their coarseness, they smell faintly of lanolin and smoke. A deep primal comfort. The feeling of being cloaked in deep silence, protected by thick walls and the weight of history. This is the Athenian night in its purest form, simple, enduring, necessary. The cool air settles deeper, still bringing with it the promise of deep, uninterrupted sleep. Let the slow, quiet energy of this ancient house surround you. Let the rhythms of the past guide your own breath. Feel the gentle pressure of the blanket, the softness of the simple bedding. The earthen floor beneath is cool and steady, a foundation of deep permanence. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to listen for only the sound of the slow, smooth transition into the velvet darkness of sleep. The amber light shrinks, softly diminishing its intensity. The flame is small, persistent, hypnotic, a tiny beacon in the deep, ancient stone silence. Are held here, suspended in the calm of the Athenian home. The world slows down, the breath deepens. Thoughts drift away like tiny clouds. Let the quiet weight of the night settle upon you. A weight of rest and deep tranquility, falling deeper, deeper into the quietude of this ancient, ordinary day rest. Now within the hushed coolness, the air grew heavy. Still a cold velvet press against the skin. The scent of loam and millennia of sleeping dust filled the hollow space. Each footfall was absorbed by the earth below. A muted thud swallowed by the silence. We moved through passages narrower, now defined by the relentless chill of the mountain heart. The lamplight cast elongated ghosts of ourselves dancing upon the hewn rock faces. Ancient engineers had etched their precise geometries into the darkness here. Dedication to permanence, a silent defiance of the wind and the sun. We sought the chamber described in the crumbling vellum scrolls, the place where the keepers had stored the final relic before the great dispersion. Stone floor underfoot shifted from rough basalt to polished slate, reflecting the hesitant glow. We continued our slow descent, spiraling inward towards the earth's quiet core. The pressure mounted not physically, but in the immense weight of historical time suspended here. Breathing slowed, mirroring the stillness of the deep. Cold architecture, the memory of the sun began to feel distant, a warm dream fading at the threshold. Very silence here seemed to possess substance, a dense hush that muffled thought. We're trespassers in a domain built for eternity untouched by. The fleeting ages above, the passage opened suddenly into an immense subterranean cavern. It was not a natural space, but a vaulted wonder of human. Endeavor columns of dark basalt rose to dizzying heights like petrified forest giants. The roof was lost. To the absolute shadow above the reach of our pale amber glowing. The center lay a circular pool of water, utterly undisturbed. Its surface was a mirror of polished onyx reflecting the distant flame. The quiet was profound, a density of silence that pressed against the eardrums. It felt as though the very concept of sound had been exiled from this deep sanctum. The walls were etched with complex, astronomical diagrams now cloaked in moss and shadow, celestial maps charting constellations that perhaps no longer shone in the heavens. The geometry of the room was perfect, a mathematical meditation on order and chaos. Every stone block spoke of disciplined effort, of countless hours spent in devotion. We moved slowly along the perimeter, unwilling to break the surface of the black water. The air tasted of pure mineral and frozen time, a restorative cold beside the pool upon a plinth of ancient stone rested a lone object. It was a box of dark wood cloaked in a layer of fine chalky patina, no hinges were visible, no joins, merely smooth, seamless construction. It felt cold beneath the fingertips, carrying the chill of centuries. We recognized the symbol etched into its lid, a star of 6 points, interwoven with a winding serpent. This was the seal. The brotherhood who guarded the hidden knowledge with careful reverence, we attempted to unlock its silent mystery. There was no clasp, only a subtle pressure point upon the upper curve of the carving. A faint click echoed in the monumental space. Sound so small yet immensely significant. The lid lifted slowly, emitting a breath of stored cold air and dry perfume. Inside the wooden enclosure lay not gold nor jewels, nor heavy documentation. It contained only a single sheet of material, like dried parchment, yet glowing faintly. It was the hue of the setting sun, a soft, internal luminescence. The material felt impossibly thin, like the shed wing of a night flyer. Upon its surface were written only 3 words in a language we could not immediately place. They shimmered and shifted, seeming to rearrange their ancient order. Before our tired eyes, the glow intensified, casting the cavern walls in otherworldly orange light shadows. Danced wildly across the towering basalt columns now painted in fire. The hushed stillness fractured slightly, the density of the quiet beginning to yield. Then the air began to thin around us, a sensation of drifting upwards away from the bedrock. The sound of the subterranean river that had been utterly hushed now began to sing softly far below. A voice low and resonant seemed to whisper from the reflection in the onyx pool. It spoke of the eastern gate and the sleepless watchmen of the deep desert. The words were melodic but carried the weight of colossal distance, unrelenting vigilance. The sheet of amber light began to lift itself, hovering weightless above the open box. We watched it ascend slowly, dissolving into the deep shadows of the vaulted ceiling. The echo of the desert watchman lingered in the vast cold stone, leaving only the perfect stillness of the dark water below, now silent once more. Stood captivated by the sudden absence, the profound shift in the air itself. Box was empty save for the imprint of the luminous paper. Mystery had only deepened, demanding silent obedience to the road. Ahead, the memory of the whispering voice carried us far from the stone chamber in our minds towards the distant shimmering dust of the unforgiving eastern sky. A call to wander where the mountains give way to endless sand and star-bright night sleep. Now, and let the eastern wind guide your dreams until the next turning of the path. You are traveling towards the silent vigil of the desert horizon. The air grows heavy, now thick. With the midday sun beginning its long, slow climb, the temperature within the cool heart of the stone-walled house remains mercifully buffered against the searing heat outside. We observe the lingering scent of morning incense, a trace element dissipating. into the ancient rafters overhead. A quiet domestic rhythm persists here, far removed from the dust and shouting of the Agora. This hour between the morning market and the afternoon leisure holds a deep hush, a profound stillness etched into the very fabric of the Athenian day. The movement of shadows across the beaten earth floor seems to slow to an almost imperceptible crawl. The light itself is now a rich amber hue, filtered and fractured by the narrow, high placement of the windows designed intentionally to keep the direct glare at bay. These walls of ancient stone absorb the energy of the world outside, holding it captive until the evening cool can safely reclaim the city. Listen deeply for the subtle sounds of ordinary existence. The faint rustle of a linen shift, the almost inaudible scrape of a terracotta jug moved across a polished surface. The household staff performs their duties with practiced silence, their movements economical and deeply ingrained by habit. The master of the oikos, the citizen, whose mind is dedicated to philosophy and public discourse, begins his preparations for the afternoon's intellectual nourishment. He does not rush for time in Athens, moves not by the frantic tick of a modern clock, but by the steady, reliable arc of the sun and the slow turning of the seasons. His simple wool tunic, perhaps freshly rinsed, smells clean and arid, a scent of lye and sundry thyme, adhering faintly to the soft white threads. He studies his face, not in a grand glass mirror, which is yet a future luxury, but in a highly polished disc of bronze. Reflection within the copper surface is subtle and muted, less harsh than modern clarity, demanding a slower, softer assessment of the self. This preparation is a ritual, a careful framing of the demeanor one must present to the critical gaze of one's peers at the Lyceum or the Academy. He smooths the careful arrangement of his beard, a symbol of his status and his maturity. Velvet fringe framing a deeply thoughtful expression. The world outside the threshold awaits his considered judgment, his measured opinion, his contribution to the ongoing civic dialogue that defines this unique civilization he steps finally into. The courtyard, where the light is brighter but still tempered by the overarching shadow of the peristyle columns. These ancient columns stand silently, witnessing the repetitive dramas of Athenian domestic life generation. The smooth marble cool to the touch. He takes a moment to breathe deeply, inhaling the dry, earthy fragrance of the surrounding hills, carried on the faint breath of a shifting breeze. His sandals strike the ground with a soft rhythmic thud, a walking pace that speaks of contemplation, not haste or measured movement toward profound understanding. The destination now is the gymnasium in the heart of Athenian intellectual and physical refinement. It is a place of structured ease, a complex designed not merely for exercise, but for the careful cultivation of both the body and the philosophic mind. Imagine the wide dust of the palestra floor, warmed slightly by the midday sun, releasing a faint earthy scent that mingles with the strong smell of heated olive oil. The air is thick with the languid energy of youthful exertion and deep, serious debate, a unique perfume of intellect and effort. Younger men are engaged in the timeless practice of wrestling, grappling softly in the dust, their forms oiled and shining like burnished copper under the high blue ceiling of the sky. Their movements are graceful, deliberate, practiced movements, designed to instill both discipline and a profound appreciation for physical form. They seek not brutal victory, but the demonstration of controlled strength, the pursuit of arete excellence in all its forms. Our Athenian citizen moves past them towards their sheltered cloister, the covered walkway, where the serious thinkers gather here. Under the protecting shade of the roof, philosophers and citizens recline on low stone benches or walk slowly together, discussing matters of geometry, ethics, and the true nature of happiness. The low murmur of their voices creates a deeply soothing sound, a continuous harmonic vibration of intellect at work, a gentle, unending stream of inquiry. Topic of discussion might be the organization of a new shipment of grain from the Black Sea, or perhaps the challenging structure of a recent Platonic dialogue. The profound and the prosaic mingle effortlessly within this hallowed Athenian space. We sit quietly on the periphery, observing this scene of studied concentration, allowing the soft cadence of their speech to wash over us the words themselves drift and soften, losing their sharp edges, becoming nothing more than a pattern of rhythmic sound, sinking deep into the quiet chambers of your own sleeping mind here. The slow, careful articulation of complex ideas, the pauses for reflection, the respectful engagement. Differing viewpoints is a soundscape of civilization itself, a quiet assertion of the human dedication to logic and measured discourse. The light shifts, moving slowly, etching new shadows beneath the brows of the marble busts, placed strategically. Along the portico, these sculpted figures, silent witnesses, represent the heroes and thinkers of previous ages, their blank eyes seeming to hold a silent understanding of all that passes beneath them. Their forms are cloaked in the perpetual dignity of white stone, eternally cooled and quieted. The afternoon stretches out before them, an expansive gift of unhurried time dedicated solely to the pursuit of the good. Life, no pressing deadlines, no urgent telecommunications, no frantic scramble for immediate attention disturbs this elegant, slow procession of hours. There is only the measured rotation of the sun across the sky, marking the steady, dependable rhythm of the Athenian routine feel. The cool, smooth texture of the marble bench upon which you imagine yourself reclining, your own breathing begins to synchronize with the slow, deliberate pace of the philosophers. Argument deepening, steadying, softening into a long exhaled breath of profound release. The low, thrumming sound of debate continues, gently receding now to the background, a constant reassuring presence. Dust motes suspended in the pillars of light slowly descend, settling softly upon the warm earth. A profound sense of historical immersion overtakes the consciousness. A quiet knowledge that you are enveloped within the ancient, unchanging pulse of this Longoni day. This is the deep, unchanging heart of Athens, the core routine that supported its brilliance, its leisure, its capacity for creation, is the boring, predictable excellence of daily habit that allows for the explosive flowering of art and philosophy. We drift now along the shaded walkways of the gymnasium, following the slowest movement of the shadows. We are entirely untethered by urgency, held only by the hypnotic rhythm of the surrounding quiet conversation. The voices are becoming softer, more distant, like the sound of water flowing over smooth river stones, a constant gentle whisper. The air is still heavy, but now it is a comfortable weight, a blanket of warm stillness settling gently over your shoulders. Let the history surround you, let the soft dust of the ancient world settle over your eyelids. We remain suspended in this perfect moment of Athenian quietude, where the pursuit of wisdom merges seamlessly with the easy contentment of a deeply structured routine. Citizen rests his mind, finding peace not in idleness, but in the satisfying labor of deep thought, and in the very quiet of this afternoon, the profound realization settles that deep, restful sleep is itself the ultimate ancient luxury, the true luxury of a well-ordered life. We listen to the slow, steady breath of the world outside, becoming the slow, steady breath of your own deep slumber. The shadows lengthen further, stretching across the silent dust towards the final deep release of the coming dusk. We wait within this hushed perimeter for the last vestiges of daylight to finally dissolve into the boundless velvet blackness of the attic night. The amber light yielded slowly to the deep violet shadow. Clay bowl that held the evening lentil shad been scraped clean and placed carefully upside down upon a small wooden shelf. A hush descended upon the inner courtyard where the heat of the attic sun still clung to the whitewashed walls. It was the hour when the ancient stone off the foundation breathed out a coolness, only perceptibly though. Bare feet moving across the dry earth floor, the citizen whose day we trace called Lysander. Perhaps a humble potter, a modest olive grower, moved with the slow, deliberate movements of profound fatigue, lifted the small earthenware lamp flame, a tiny shivering spire fueled by the precious scent of olive oil. The light cast long wandering ghosts upon the rough plaster of the andrinth men's quarter of the small dwelling. He paused to tend the wick, trimming the charred nubbin with a slender bronze instrument, a task of quiet domestic reverence. Each measure of oil conserved was a small defiance against the coming chill and the expense of the morning. Shadow of his hand enlarged monstrously across the ceiling beams, briefly obscuring the soot-etched patterns left by generations of similar small flames. This light was the final barrier between the known world of the house and the absolute blackness of the Hellenic night. He watched the flame for a timeless moment, its warm glow, wrapping the simple ruin a sheath of temporary peace. Then, with a smooth, careful motion, he cupped his palm over the mouth of the vessel, cutting off the air. The flame did not vanish instantly. It resisted for a fleeting second, a miniature struggle against oblivion there, collapsing inward with a faint, almost silent sigh of evaporating smoke, a thin thread of charcoal. Centros into the cooling air, and the sudden absolute dark was thick and velvet. Heavy Lysander stood for a moment, hallowing his eyes to adjust to the profound absence of illumination. Could hear the subtle whisper off the coarse linen blanket by. Unfolded in the adjoining chamber where his wife was already settling up, and the simple wooden clina, the floor beneath his feet was uneven, smooth, in some place pitted, where the earth had worn away from the constant traffic of sandals, and bare, solacey moved toward the cubically, a small closet designated for sleep. The air here was thicker, dampened by the proximity to the unmortared stone walls. He drew off the simple woolen chiton garment, heavy with the dust off the day's work near the Makos. Rode the wool was scratchy, comforting in its familiarity. He folded it neatly, a necessary discipline, even exhaustion. Body now exposed to the air felt the subtle drafts creeping in beneath the heavy wooden door, coolness that promised deep restful sleep. The bed awaited him, a simple frame of pine wood strung with leather thongs, providing minimal suspension. Upon the thongs rested a mattress, a large bag of rough hemp canvas filled with dried grasses and sheep willet offered a yielding cradlia soporific. Relief from the hardness of the day, he settled down, slow, lithe. Dry rustle of the mattress, familiar sound intrinsically linked to the dissentinto. Athenian slumber, he pulled the heavy blanket of undyed wool up to his chin, scratchiness reassuring it. Carried the faint, persistent scent of sun-baked fleece and stored air, smell as old as the mountains surrounding the city. The stillness now was not silent, but woven with the sounds of the settled night outside. The thick mud brick walls, a chorus of unseen life, began its slow, rhythmic chant. The crickets pulsed their tireless song, a wave of sound, washing over the rooftops, a sound the head defined. Athenian night since time immemorial. Distant dogs barked near the olive groves, their cries muffled, softened by the distant scene, the inertia, the cooling earth from the direction of the Agora, central heart of the city, came a low, continuous droneth, sound of a large population breathing a heavy collective. Exhalation. Lysander listened not actively, but allowed the sounds to become of the vast, yielding silences that precedes true deep sleep. He thought vaguely of the day past, tedious arguments over the price of clay, the heavy weight of the water amphorethe, brief exchange of gossip at the fountain house. These mundane memorials were already beginning to fray at the edges of his consciousness. This forms the weight of the house pressed gently upon him, thick earth holding him firma. Structure of simple necessity prodding him from the ill humors of the night. He imagined the great roof tile Phoebe terracotta. Shields overlapping, carefully keeping the morning dew far above his head. Above the tiles stretched the limitless expanse of the ether, the deep indigo sky been pricked now with the cold, indifferent glow of the ancient stars, seen in Namby Hesiod by Homer, by generations of shepherd shoe, had watched their slow wheeling dance above the hills of Hymettus. He felt the vastness of Timine, the cool air on his cheek, the awareness that the routines of this night were merely echoes of routines performed by his father and his father's fathers, stretching back through centuries of Athenian dust. A simple act of lying still was an anchor to the deepest history, a profound, unbroken chain. The tension in his shoulders eased, muscles loosening their grip, and the bones they had held taut all day. His breathing became deeper, slower, the rhythm shifting from the quickened pace of wakefulness to the slow, deliberate pulse of repose. He sank further into the straw-filled mattress. Gentle pressure points yielding to the weight of his weary limbs. Feeling was one of perfect contentment to yielding sensation of being held by the strong, dark architecture of the world. The rough texture of the wool against his skin, faint, dry scent of the wood from beneath. Profound quiet emanating from the center of the earth. He allowed his mind to drift toward the edge of understanding her. Thought itself dissolve a scene to pure atmospheric sensation. The body demanded its tribute of rest, a deep primal need that superseded all philosophy, all political debate, all worries about the coming harvest. He imagined the shadow of the Herm Square. Pillar with the head of Hermes standing guard silently in the courtyard, a presence of stability and assurance and protection. That small weathered image etched by the hands of a forgotten sculptor watched over the silent house as millennia flowed past. Its base he descended, now a gentle, effortless fall into the deep, warm waters of unconsciousness. The last coherent thought was merely a recognition of comfort. Simple, blessed comfort of having a roof, a wall, and a rough blanket. The boundaries of the room began to blur the outlines of the simple terracotta water jar merged into the surrounding darkness. The weight of the dark was not crushing, but embracing a profound yielding to the timeless inertia of the earth itself. He was suspended in the current of ancient Athenian slumber, a profound state of non-doing, where the complexities of the police retreated into the realm of shadow play. The distant murmur of the city became merely a soft oceanic roar, constant background, hum against which his own consciousness was slowly extinguished. He sank below the level of immediate sound, though the cricket song bellowed the occasional shifting of the rush mats. He was sinking into the very soil that nourished the olive trees that bore the fuel for the lamp that had guided him to this moment of repose, the quality of the sleep deep and unmoving beyond mere restinto, a restorative void, a true surrender to the night. The simple cotton tunic he wore felt like liquid shadow against his skin, rough spun. Threads a comforting boundary between self and earth. The silence was now completely a profound, absolute quiet in the deep hollow of the Athenian night. This was the great pause necessary for getting bored, the inevitable summoning of the rooster. And harsh light of the new day, he rested in the arms of that ancient quietudia, quiet only to Thasu, who lived their lives be the simple dictates of the sun and the moon. The house settled further around him. Wooden beams contracting infinitesimal apron. Faint creaking sounds like the quiet language of the structure itself. The air hung heavy and still imbued with the dry mineral scent of baked clay and dust. He drifted further out upon the dark current of sleep, carried effortlessly toward the center of the night's profound oblivion. The memory of the day faded entirely, leaving behind only the sensation of gravity pulling gently downward into the deep repose. His breath was now almost imperceptible. Whisper in the darkness, a slow, sustained rhythm of life sustained without effort, without thought. He was merely a warm presence in a quiet room of sun-baked bricks, a small center of rest in the vast sweep of ancient history. The knowledge of the Agora, next the monumental temple soul, receded into the periphery of his consciousness, leaving only the immediate sensation of the warmth of blanket and the firmness of the earth beneath. Was yielding entirely to the moment of perfect, timeless suspension in the heart of the Athenian night. No need for calculation, need for planning, only the slow, steady beat of profound, restful slumber. Dreamless depth of this repose was a powerful balm against the anxieties of debt and the unpredictable nature of the harvest day. Slept as generations slept. Before him, cloaked in the quiet dignity of exhaustion, the cool darkness wrapped him closely, a perfect, undisturbed silence holding him steady until the dawn. This deep inertia continued its slow, profound work, sinking him further away from the surface of the waking world. The textures of the rough wool and the dry hay were the final anchors to the physical reality of the room. These two now began to dissolve into the uniform stillness of the dark, breathed into peace and exhaled the last vestiges of effort, letting go entirely. A profound surrender, the heavy historical silence of the sleeping city. He was now suspended in the deep blue indigo of the Attic night, a small warm shadow in a room built of sun and earth. Sleep was thick and yielding, a deep, slow descending to the core of quietude. No thought, only bane, no future, only now a heavy and complete immersion in the necessary oblivion of the dark, ancient hours. The cool air flowed gently, a silent river over the rough stone, flourishing his face. With the promise of deep, uninterrupted rest, he moved further away from the sounds of the dogs and the whispering city only. The slow pulse of his own life remained a quiet, hidden rhythm resting in the heart of history beneath the silent watch of the stars. Profound and endless stillness held him. Perfect quiet deep within the simple Athenian home. The sleep was a heavy wool blanket pulled close over the face of consciousness. Deep, profound rest yielding, sinking, falling into the heart. The ancient night where nothing stirred and time stood still, absolute. Stillness, absolute, dark, absolute repose. The air within this hidden vault settles around you like cooling velvet. Density of forgotten time presses gently against your mind dust motes. Suspended like infinitesimal stars drift lazily within the single shaft of amber light. This light now reveals the true nature of the chamber. Not merely a storage space of kings, but a celestial engine, a colossal mechanism of obsidian and silvered bronze. Its outermost rings stand taller than a sleeping man, etched with markings that trace the silent paths of distant galaxies. The cold metal exudes the absolute precision of an ancient art. Each wheel is cloaked in the patina of millennia. They appear utterly frozen, yet you sense a deep resonant stillness within them. Vast potential waiting for activation.